Mei Ru Yen took out a small bell that was about the size of a palm and remarked with a trembling voice, This is a dreaming soul bell. It's the best attack weapon for martial artists practicing demonic techniques. The few people looked at each other in dismay. They had been shocked by their family's new master's liberalness with money. Zhou Huayan swallowed his saliva. Gu, do you know why we've suddenly received a new master? Why would young master rely on him? Moreover, it's rumored that the new pills Xing De Hall has been selling lately have all been brought in by him. This person wouldn't be an aristocrat of some large, influential family, right? Zhou Yenan curled his lip and darkly replied, You're surprised by this? If they were to know that the top quality and high-ranked pills being sold in Xing De Hall were all single-handedly refined by Shi Gongzi, wouldn't they be scared to death? But, this fact was truly too important. Even if all the people in front of him were trustworthy, Zhou Yenan still didn't dare to say anything. He merely coughed under his breath and said, This Shi Gongzi is the same genius Dr. Shi that I told you guys about previously. He has given our master a great favor. Not only has he helped master bring his mother out of Murong family's grip, he's even slowly helping heal her of her sickness. It can be said that young master's life is Shi Gongzi's, so naturally, our lives are also Shi Gongzi's. In the future, we must treat Shi Gongzi as our true master. After saying this, Zhou Yenan pointed at the porcelain bottle in Chen Bai's hands and said, Trust me. As long as you guys listen to Gongzi's words, the benefits you'll have in the future will be boundless. Everyone looked at the porcelain bottle in Chen Bai's hands and suddenly their gazes were burning again. If Shi Gongzi were to give them a similar top-quality pill, then their rank upgrade would be just around the corner. Once they returned to Xing De Hall, He immediately began to treat Gu Yulan. Again, she injected her and transferred a bit of her wooden attributes' spiritual power to her. After this, Gu Yulan woke up for a period of time, completely bewildered. She caught sight of He and instantly seemed to turn teary-eyed, mumbling incoherent things under her breath. But because cold food pills' influence on her wisdom was too large, she fell unconscious again shortly after she opened her eyes. After washing her hands, He walked outside to a pavilion with Gu Lufeng. When she saw his grave and worried expression, she couldn't help but begin to comfort him. Don't worry, your mother's wisdom has already improved a little. Because this type of poison slowly corrodes, recovering her wisdom will also be slow, thus causing the process to be challenging. We can only slowly go through the suffering. But luckily, your mother has already passed through the most challenging stage. When Gu Lufeng heard Hexi's words, he couldn't help but smile. To have little Yuer, who's both a genius doctor and my master, treat my mother, what do I have to worry about? Hexi looked at his demonically charming expression and gleaming peach blossom eyes. His entire person felt as if it had returned to its languid and rascally self that was present in sealed dragon domain. But what was different from then and now was that he was no longer wearing a mask and the grief and melancholy that once resided at the bottom of his eyes was gone. It was evident that he had let go of his previous sorrows. When he saw Hexi closely staring at him without speaking, Gu Lufeng lowly coughed and suddenly smiled, Little Shuer, it can't be seen but you're quite liberal with your money towards this subordinate's people, ah. I saw the charms that you gave Chen Bai and the others. I'm telling you, those are worth 70 or 80 million yuan crystals. But Little Shuer, you can't favor one and discriminate the other, ah. I'm still the first person to follow you, right? Speaking of this, how come everyone else has had a first meeting gift, including Zhou Yenan, but I haven't gotten mine? While Gu Lufeng was speaking these words, he was leaning on one of the pavilion's pillars. His mouth was faintly lifted into a ghost of a smile and his peach blossom eyes were full of joy. His entire person emitted an outstanding aura that couldn't be properly described, yet the words he spoke were that of a spoilt child that was throwing a tantrum. Hexi didn't know whether to laugh or cry and looked at him with a blank glance. You're at the summit of gold core stage and I'm only at low-level foundation establishment stage. What treasures could I have on my hand that could catch your eye? Gu Lufeng didn't respond to her, he only mildly laughed in response and unblinkingly looked at her with a burning gaze. He felt increasingly uncomfortable under his gaze, and with a flick of her wrist, 2 storage rings appeared in between them. She threw them to him and unhappily said, "Don't speak, I want to bully you the same way you just bullied me." Gu Lufeng took a look inside the storage rings and found that both of them were filled with crystal stones. Moreover, the lowest rank was a second-rank crystal stone. With the 2 storage rings combined, there seemed to be about 70 to 80 million crystals. He laughed and said, "Master, is this your plan? To use your coins and crush your subordinate to death?" He cast him a glance. "Your job is to properly help the 4 people, arriving at Xingde Hall this afternoon, adjust. I hope that they can cause people to cower at the sight of them by the time they go out and control the crowds tomorrow." He mischievously laughed. "Even if our military force is weak, we must smash our crystal rocks on outsiders, then they won't dare to act blindly without thinking." Gu Lufeng took the storage rings and stored them away. A smile bloomed on his face at Heshi's words, a smile that was indolent and demonically charming. "I chased for so long, yet in the end, these 2 storage rings aren't even for me. How ironic, I'm your first subordinate, yet I'm treated so." He saw Heshi fix him with a cold stare and couldn't help but rub his nose and laugh. "Okay, even though I wasn't given a first meeting gift, the feeling of taking master's money and dressing up as a local tyrant and smashing people isn't too bad either. Rest assured. Wait until tomorrow, you'll see 4 golden rays flashing from swords to people who don't watch their mouths." Finished speaking, Gu Lufeng played with the storage rings in his hand before turning around to leave. He left behind Heshi, who was stood completely still. Her originally icy face transformed and a tiny trace of pain made its way onto it. How come her originally bulging purse was reduced to half the size in just half a day's worth of work? And don't even mention the treasures she raked in during her time in Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory. Even the crystal stones she earned from selling her pills were practically all gone. Thinking some more, she also thought of how she had to buy Shi Jia and the others, these 10 people, clothing once they left the mountain. Just thinking of all the money she was losing pained her. Others spent money like running water, she spent money like floodwaters. Not only that, she also had to bring up numerous subordinates in the future. Zze. It would be better for her to go exploit her family's treasure, Dan, and refine more pills. On the second day, Xingde Hall's doorway was just as lively as the previous day. The long line stretched through the entirety of the eastern street. But, what gave everyone lined up a pleasant surprise was the fact that, today, Xingde Hall decided to open shop earlier than expected. Not only that, there was a male that claimed himself as shopkeeper Shi who appeared in front of everyone. With a wide smile stretched across his face, he announced in front of everyone, "These last few days has been Xingde Hall's experiment with reopening business. Today, we've officially decided to reopen Xingde Hall. In order to show our thanks to everyone for their enthusiastic support over these past few days, we've decided to greatly increase the amount of pills that can be bought today, as well as the time you have to buy them." After saying this, Shi-san slightly turned around to point at the medicine cupboard. On the cupboard there were various porcelain bottles all neatly arranged. "Today we've made 3,000 best quality pills and 10,000 top quality pills available for purchase. Among this is also 100 second-ranked best quality pills. Of course, in the future and depending on the situation, we may decide to release a few third-ranked best quality pills to the public." Once Shi-san's final words were out in the open, the raptly listening crowd immediately exploded and everyone's voices could be heard speaking at once. Second-ranked and third-ranked best quality pills. That implied that these pills would have significant results on Meridian stage and Gold Core stage martial artists. Even nascent soul stage martial artists could receive some benefits from these pills. Moreover, this could all occur without any poisoning. Just what type of best quality holy pill was this? Over the previous few days, there had been talk about the Grand Master that refined these pills. If the so-called Grand Master only refined first-ranked pills, then they couldn't really be counted as a Grand Master. It just wasn't befitting to that level. But today, this rumor had quickly been proven untrue. As it turned out, the other person had already refined second and third ranked pills, they just simply didn't wish to start selling them yet. Shisan extended both of his hands out and made pressing down motions, quieting down the crowd. Although he was at no more than foundation establishment stage, his words already carried the steadiness and imposing manner that a leader possessed. However, in order to assure that everyone, who waited in line for so long, is able to purchase pills from our medicinal hall, we've decided to set a limit on the amount of pills you can purchase. Each day, you may only buy up to 3 best quality pills and up to 5 top quality pills. What? You can only buy 3 top quality pills? Once Shisan uttered those words, the housekeepers, from large, influential families, that were lined up at the very front of the line, suddenly became discontent. When they heard Shisan speak of expanding the time people could buy pills, they were planning to buy every single pill, leaving nothing for everyone else. But if everyone was only entitled to 3 pills, at most, how could he possibly do what he had set out to do? The old man, wearing yellow clothes that belonged to the Huangfu family, who stood at the very front of the line immediately angrily burst out, "Youngster, do you know what type of people we are? For us to come to your small Xingde hall to buy medicines is giving you face. I'm telling you to be mindful. Just give me all of the best quality pills as well as those 102nd ranked ones and let me take them away." This old man would even be willing to pay you triple your original price for this. But if you still refuse to see my good intentions, don't blame me for being rude. Once he finished speaking, 7 or 8 martial artists wearing similar clothing appeared from behind the old man's back. Each of them was a high-level foundation establishment stage martial artist and they were being led by someone who was at meridian stage. All of them stared at Shisan with ill intentions clearly written in their eyes. But Shisan's response to being threatened by these martial artists, whose cultivation was clearly much higher than his, was just to sneer at the old man. Regardless of who comes to our Xingde hall to buy pills, they're first and foremost our customer. All of the martial artists behind you also bore through the night, just as you did. If we were to let you take away all of the best quality pills, how would we be deserving of their support? Shisan's response caused appreciation and happiness to rise in the martial artists lined up behind this group. Those people from influential families were arrogant and domineering, often cutting in line. Over these past 7 days, all the pills had been taken away by them, so even though they had waited in line for so long, their chances of being able to buy even 1 or 2 pills were low. Shisan's actions today were clearly in consideration towards them, martial artists who didn't have much of a family background. How could they not be moved to tears? When the old man heard Shisan's words, he felt absolutely infuriated. Turning around, he waved at the guards behind him and bellowed out orders. "Ruthlessly lecture this youth for me and rob all of the remaining pills. I want to see if Xingde Hall has gotten lofty aspirations after eating a leopard's bladder since they actually dare to face off against our Huangfu family." When the crowd saw those 7 to 8 martial artists were just about to rush toward Shisan, each one of their faces showed anxiousness. But Shisan was completely calm and merely raised his hands up and clapped once. In the blink of an eye, everyone felt as if they saw a golden streak flashing by, nearly blinding them as it passed. After a moment, when everyone composed themselves and focused more on those streaks of light, they saw that 4 martial artists at meridian stage had positioned themselves in front of Shisan. If it were only martial artists at meridian stage, nobody would bat much of an eye. However, what caught everyone's attention were the things on their body. Each person had the same set of 4th-ranked defense clothes, flying light sword, flowing light boots, and assembling spirit jade hat. When these 4 people appeared, everyone felt as if they were looking at glittering lights and everyone's eyes were brightened in shock. For a moment, it was absolutely silent in front of Xingde Hall. Even the fiendish old man and his several guards were shocked speechless. That was actually a full set of 4th-ranked clothes, ah! Even one piece of those clothes would be worth about 1,000,000 yuan crystals. If the whole suit were to be calculated, you wouldn't be able to beat it without at least 20 million yuan crystals. Huangfu family's old housekeeper's face was filled with shock and bewilderment. These were nothing more than guards for a medicinal hall, yet they actually wore clothes that cost upwards of 10 million yuan crystals. Even the rich and imposing Huangfu family would be reluctant to do so. Just who was the new master of Xingde Hall? In moments, the people who wanted to take advantage of this crisis for their own personal gains and argue against Xingde Hall's new stipulations no longer dared to act rashly. This large show showed how big a hand Xingde Hall's new master had. Everyone now believed that this new master must have come out of a large sect or large influential family and collectively decided not to act rashly without understanding everything about the situation. After successfully passing this 7 days test, Xingde Hall was officially opening for business, and naturally, it was doing exceptionally well. Over the following days, the medicinal hall's newly hired servants' feet barely touched the ground, they barely had the time to spare effort to drink their saliva and pant. Each day, shopkeepers Zhou and Shi-san were all smiles as they busied themselves with watching the rising income. By contrast, Jixing Hall, which had been full of people just days before, now sat unfrequented and incomparable to Xingde Hall. After all, their medicines couldn't compare to other medicinal halls and their hall's doctor was only a first-rank doctor whilst Zhou Yan'an was at the very least a second-rank doctor. Adding on to this was the fact that Xingde Hall's reputation had always been good, better than Jixing Hall's. So, now that they were selling best quality pills, people would naturally rush to go buy from Xingde Hall. Jixing Hall's waiters, little manservants, and part-time workers all miserably looked toward the lively Xingde Hall across from them and heaved a sigh. At this moment, they suddenly saw a man that looked to be about 50 years old. His face didn't necessarily look pure as he was slowly walking into Jixing Hall. When he saw Jixing Hall's bleak and declining state, his face couldn't help but become heavy as he coldly snorted. Shopkeeper Yu, who was originally asleep at the front desk, immediately returned to his senses once he heard that cold snort. When he raised his head to look and caught sight of the old man, he seemed suddenly frightened and jumped out of his chair to welcome the visitor. "Dr. Chang, why have you come?" Dr. Gu, who was previously hiding in the back of the hall, also hurriedly rushed out to respectfully greet Dr. Chang when he heard shopkeeper Yu's words. Dr. Chang impatiently waved his hand at their greetings. Instead, he pointed at the lack of business in Jixing Hall, then turned to point at the lively Xingde Hall, who still had a long line of people waiting to enter, and coldly asked, "What happened? Master, had you come here to reopen Jixing Hall to completely suppress Xingde Hall, so much so that they wouldn't even be able to lift their heads up? Just how exactly do you guys handle things?" Dr. Gu wiped at the cold sweat on his forehead and didn't even dare to lift his eyes as he promptly replying to Dr. Chang's question, "Xingde Hall recently changed masters. Ever since a new master took over, they began to sell a type of supplement spirit pill. The maximum spiritual force this best quality supplement spirit pill can contain is 12 crystals, and the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution appraised it to have an essence purity of 99%. Ever since Xingde Hall began to sell these pills, all of the customers began to line up there. Adding on to that is the fact that Zhou Yan'an is a second-rank doctor and Jixing Hall only has Xiaoda to oversee it, so, Dr. Gu's words were spoken very cautiously. He alongside Jixing Hall's shopkeeper and waiters had all been directly employed to work here. The person that hired them was exactly this Dr. Chang's master. His master was a man whose clothes were grey, wore a windbreaker and cloak which covered his facial features. When the man had originally hired them, he once said that Xingde Hall's supply of pills has already been cut off. In the end, the hall would become deserted and hard to maintain. All they needed to do was open Jixing Hall and properly run it, and Xingde Hall would be destroyed within a day. This person named Dr. Chang was named Changsheng. He was actually a fourth-rank doctor and was that grey-clothed male's trusted confidant. This Jixing Hall was actually under Dr. Chang's name, so he could be considered as half of their master. Now that Jixing Hall was so dismal, how could Dr. Gu not be terrified? Dr. Chang wrinkled his brows and confusion flitted past his eyes. "Do you know who Xingde Hall's new master is?" Terrified, Dr. Gu shook his head and said, I don't know, but I did send some of our hall's little manservants to nose around Xingde Hall. According to the information we've received, Xingde Hall's master should have a large influence. Oh. Dr. Gu choked on his saliva before replying. Xingde Hall's 4 inner hall guards all wear clothes and possess weapons that are 4th rank. If the master doesn't have a large influence, where would the big hand come from? Not only that, but I heard that a few days ago, when someone tried to create a disturbance, a gold core stage martial artist and a nascent soul stage martial artist, that nobody knows where Xingde Hall found them from, came out to suppress the person. When that deep spiritual force started pressed down, everyone immediately no longer dared to budge. Dr. Chang's eyebrows were already creased as his face fluctuated between emotions. Has anyone looked into the identity of the refining pharmacist? No. Dr. Gu shook his head and continued, but the refining pharmacist is reportedly exceptionally strong. Currently, they're selling 1st and 2nd ranked pills. In the future, they'll sell 3rd and even 4th ranked pills. If they are truly able to refine 4th ranked best quality pills, then wouldn't they, at the very least, be at Grand Master level? The ranks of refining pharmacists and doctors were completely different. The main divisions were entrance level, learner's level, pre-master level, master level, grand master level, heaven's master level, pre-ancestor level, and sacred ancestor level. But on Miluo continent, there were few who could achieve master level as refining pharmacists. There were even fewer grand master refining pharmacists. If the person refining these best quality pills was truly a grand master refining pharmacist, the situation would become serious. Dr. Chang's expression turned unsightly as he incoherently muttered to himself. After a while had passed, he finally clenched his teeth and said, "Have you guys bought that best quality pill? Take it out so I can have a look." "We haven't." "Dr. Chang, you've seen with your own eyes how long the line is. We wouldn't even be able to fight for it." "Ah." Dr. Tang unhesitatingly said this, and looked down, but nobody saw the flickering light in his eyes when he did so. He would be dumb to hand over the best quality pill he had to Dr. Chang. That pill was what he had fought others for when Xingde Hall had initially began to sell those pills, before anyone had started lining up. He still wished to use this best quality pill to advance in rank. Dr. Chang suddenly became furious and angrily yelled at the surrounding waiters and little manservants, "Rubbish! You're still not going to line up and buy it for me." Ji Xinghall's originally lazy little manservants and waiters were shocked silly by the sudden yelling and all ran out to go buy some pills. But when they looked at the unending line, if they lined up now, would there still be time for them to buy pills? Dr. Chang's face was ashen as he coldly looked at Xingde Hall, which was sitting right across from Ji Xinghall. Best quality pills. He hadn't expected that the master refining pharmacist that caused such a sensation in the black market would actually work together with Xingde Hall. Originally, Xingde Hall had already been suppressed by them. It was like an arrow at the end of its flight, but nowadays. But right now, the most important thing wasn't Xingde Hall anymore, it was the identity of that refining pharmacist. After coldly staring at Xingde Hall for a long time, Dr. Chang suddenly began to make his way over to Xingde Hall's front desk. Once he arrived in front of Zhou Yenan, he lifted his chin and frostily demanded, "Bring me a bottle of best quality pills." Flabbergasted, Zhou Yenan raised his head to look at the man who spoke. He was completely unfamiliar, and before he had time to recognize him, the people lined up behind him already started to voice their complaints. One by one the customers began to shout, "Who are you? Ah! Don't you see us all lined up? Is it because you think you're somebody? Ah! Don't you see that even the people from influential families are lined up as well?" Dr. Chang didn't get to say anything when Ji Xinghall's shopkeeper Yu, who had followed behind him, angrily burst out, "Presumptuous! This is our Ji Xinghall's Dr. Chang, a doctor that the Doctors Association recognized as a 4th-ranked doctor. You guys actually want to be presumptuous toward a grand 4th-ranked doctor?" Once those words had been said, the shouting voices immediately quieted down. 4th-ranked doctor. It was actually the same rank as Jean Ling's first doctor. Moreover, the status of a doctor was quite particular. If someone offended a doctor, they would meet countless assassination attempts. Dr. Chang looked at Zhou Yan'an and quietly coughed. What? Shopkeeper Zhou, we're both people who learn medicine. You wouldn't even be willing to give me face and sell me some pills? Zhou Yan'an didn't have time to voice his thoughts before Shi-san interrupted the conversation and impolitely said, Dr. Chang, right? Truly embarrassing. My family's master already said, if you want to buy pills, you must wait in line for your turn. After all, the amount of pills we have is limited and there are a vast amount of customers. If we were to prioritize you and sell a bottle to you, it would be unjust toward the people all lining up, am I right? Shi-san and Zhou Yan'an were different. Shi-san had no concept of a doctor's status. Shi-san only recognized one thing, which was that his family's young miss was the most awesome. Whatever nonsense doctor wouldn't even be fit to carry Hashi's shoes. Once Shi-san's words came out, the martial artists all lined up behind that were angry but didn't dare to speak, all felt incomparably carefree. On the other hand, Dr. Chang's face became extremely unsightly, but maintaining a doctor's reputation stopped him from lashing out. All he could do was angrily fling his sleeves as he turned to leave. Before he returned back to Jixing Hall, he turned back around to look at everyone surrounding Xingde Hall once last time and ground his teeth, inwardly saying, very good Xingde Hall. You actually dare to slight me, so don't blame me if I'm impolite. Later you'll taste how it feels. Shi-san disdainfully cast a glance at Dr. Chang's exiting figure and turned to everyone to clearly say, everyone rest assured. We, Xingde Hall, are a medicinal hall that sets out to aid the world and save the people. We believe in fairness. If anyone wants to walk in here and receive special treatment, you'll have to see if our Xingde Hall's guards agree with you. Shi-san's speech led to a burst of enthusiastic cheering from everyone. Xingde Hall had always promised fairness and equality, and over these past few days, they had consistently delivered on their promises. Regardless of whether it was people of the imperial family or aristocrats, whenever someone wanted to cut in line, Xingde Hall's guards were quick to lecture them. Even gold core stage martial artists weren't an exception. Holding such a strong position in fairness and equality would, no doubt, offend many influential people. However, Xingde Hall remained calm in the face of fear and continued to stand upright. This attitude caused countless common martial artists to hold an extremely favorable impression of Xingde Hall in their hearts. In the future, when others decide stand against Xingde Hall, there would always be an overwhelming amount of support for Xingde Hall. But, this was something that would happen later. 3 days after Dr. Chang had been angered into leaving, a group of angry people suddenly rushed into Xingde Hall. Before giving everyone time to react, the leader of the angry group ruthlessly overturned the front desk. The rest of the people in the group pushed everyone aside and shouted, "Move aside! Move aside! Have you not seen who has arrived? Open your eyes, it's our Murong family's third young master." Someone suddenly resentfully shouted from the crowd, "What's going on with Murong family? Aren't other aristocrats obediently lined up here? Xingde Hall already announced that you must line up if you want to buy pills. Why are you making such a ruckus?" When the leader of the group heard the shouts, he coldly sneered, "Line up? Haha, that really is a joke as big as the sky. I've never heard of a master needing to line up in their own shop. Youngster, have you grown brains yet? I will let you learn today." When he finished speaking, his subordinates rushed over, and without waiting for people to react, they knocked the martial artist, who was speaking, down to the ground and began to step all over and kick at his legs and feet. At this moment, Xingde Hall's guards finally reacted and rushed over, intending to drive these people out. But, the people who arrived were actually high-level Meridian stage martial artists. Not only that, they all had high-quality magic weapons. Momentarily, the 4 guards stopped. They could only blankly watch on as they overturned those few Foundation establishment guards and took all of the pills at the front desk. All of the surrounding martial artists, who were watching this group steal, felt injustice rise in them and some of them wanted to lend a helping hand. The large person that headed the group merely sneered, "What are you guys doing? I'm telling you, if you dare to make a move, don't even think about buying a thing from Xingde Hall in the future." "Why? What are you worth?" The large person didn't get to respond before he heard a male's cold voice sound out from the doorway, "Based on the fact that I'm this place's owner." They saw that the male looked to be about 20 years old. He had a beautiful appearance, but his eyes were steely and his face was harsh. His hands were clasped behind his back as he slowly walked to the front. Coldly laughing he said, "This entire Xingde Hall is my Murong family's. Tell me, on what basis would I not be able to ban you from buying Xingde Hall's things?" "Impossible. Xingde Hall's master doesn't even have the surname Murong. What evidence do you have that says Xingde Hall is Murong family's?" "But I heard that Xingde Hall's previous master was Gu Lufeng, who is actually someone from Murong family. Could it be that the people who purchased Xingde Hall is actually Murong family?" This. When the large man that headed the group saw everyone's bewildered state, he couldn't help but insolently laugh out. Pointing at the people who had just spoken rudely to him, he said, You, and also you, don't you guys want to buy pills? I won't make things difficult for you guys. As long as you crawl under my crotch and then kowtow to our third young master, I'll let you buy pills. What do you say?" As he spoke, he pointed at his own crotch with a face full of haughtiness and arrogance. The three people he called out were as red as a tomato. They all waved their sleeves and turned to leave. But this aggressive group was like a cat teasing a mouse. They seemed to insist on wanting to humiliate the three men as they forced them to kneel on the ground and seemed to offer them only the option of crawling under the large man's crotch. The three people were extremely vexed and their whole bodies shook as they struggled to get free. But despite their struggling, the fact was that they were only at foundation establishment stage and furthermore, they were one person versus multiple. How could they be Murong family's opponents? The several people that held the three men down all burst into laughter. "For us to let you crawl under our leader's crotch is us looking highly upon you. As long as you obediently crawl and kowtow in apology to our third young master, we'll give you a whole bottle of pills after." Everyone saw the three people almost nearing the large man's crotch when suddenly a sword flashed like lightning as it struck something. The large man that had previously been lifting his leg in preparation for those three men to crawl under him suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. "He's saying I arrogantly." Soon after, blood began to quickly flow out of his crotch area. The person who was arrogant just moments before was now rolling about on the floor and wailing in pain. Who was it? The young man who had been called third young master of the Murong family had been scared stupid by the sudden scene before him. But soon after, he became angry and hot-blooded again. "You even dare to attack this young master's people? Are you tired of living?" As soon as he voiced his questions, he saw two men come out of Xingde Hall's inner courtyard's doors. The male was walking slightly ahead of the other wore coarse, hemp clothes and he looked to be no more than about 16 or 17 years old. His lips were red and his teeth were white, he was incomparably beautiful. However, from head to toe, no spiritual power fluctuations could be sensed throughout his entire body, yet his eyes seemed to carry frostiness, causing people to feel cold. The person following behind the youth had a slender figure and common looks. He emitted a faintly detectable powerful force that pressed down on people once he arrived. In his hands, he held a sword, clear evidence that he was the one who had just acted against the large man. Naturally, these two people were He and Gu Lufeng. Today, Shi-san was the one overlooking the hall. When he saw that the circumstances were turning for the worst, he immediately made the decision to run into the inner courtyard and bring He and Gu Lufeng out. On Gu Lufeng's face, he wore a special human skin mask, so other people were unable to recognize him. He looked at the fellow that proclaimed himself as the third young master of the Murong family and sneered at him. "What are you? You don't even recognize me? You actually dare to appear in Xingde Hall?" The youth burst into laughter before continuing, "Listen properly, I'm called Murong Qian Jian, I'm Murong Manor's third young master. This Xingde Hall is my Murong family's property, so naturally it's my property as well. You little bast even dare to move against me, you're simply too impatient to continue living. I'm telling you, if you're sensitive, you would obediently kneel down and apologize to me right now. Otherwise, in the future, I'll have you blacklisted from Xingde Hall. When that happens, don't even talk about medicine, we wouldn't even sell some grass to you. Ha ha ha, He coldly looked at the arrogant youth as if she were looking at a dead person. Even if she knew that there were countless children that belonged to Murong family that couldn't be publicly seen, calling the idiot in front of her a straw bag would be elevating his status. Gu Lufeng neared Hexi's side and quietly whispered, Murong Qianjian, 1, apart from his name is a brainless and an unskilled straw bag. I'm afraid that he's but a tool that someone instigated to come here and cause a ruckus in order to dig information out of us. Hexi sneered at his words, seeing as this garbage has actually come annoyed me, there's no need to send him back in good condition. When Murong Qianjian saw Hexi and Gu Lufeng whispering to each other, he thought that it was due to the fact that they were intimidated by him. Immediately, he became haughtier and increasingly rampant. Damn, my letting you kowtow and apologize is my giving you face. Since you're hesitating to something unless you're forced, small ones, come slaughter these youngsters for me. You'll be heavily rewarded for it. See these pills? You can have as many as you want. The guards behind Murong Qianjian all enthusiastically cheered and each one of them threw themselves at Hexi like fiends. But before they could even near her, everyone saw a light sword rising in the air. Once the light sword was in the air, it split into a dozen or so separate swords and rushed toward each of the guards. After a moment, all that people heard were loud, peng sounds. Before everyone could collect their thoughts, those fiends already had fright painted all over their faces as they foolishly looked at their abdomens. All they saw was a large gaping hole in their abdomen area. Blood was gushing out of it and they could even faintly make out their internal organs in the blood. Those people's eyes were full of amazement and despair, but before they could utter their last words, they fell onto the ground with a thump and lost their lives. For a few moments, it was completely silent within Xingde Hall. Everyone looked at the male holding the sword with gazes full of shock. He didn't look to be particularly outstanding and his spiritual power fluctuations weren't very obvious, yet he was actually an expert at Gold Core stage. Faced with this unforeseen circumstance, Murong Qianjian's face was deathly pale. His guards had actually been cleanly slaughtered in an instant during this face-off. Not knowing what to do, he looked around at everyone. Suddenly, he felt the porcelain bottle that he had just snatched minutes before and was filled with happiness again. Running over to the people standing at the end of the line, he loudly said in front of everyone, You guys, any one of you guys, as long as you can help me capture those two youngsters, my Xingde Hall will give you an unlimited supply of pills in the future. When Murong Qianjian said these words, many people in the crowd looked at the full porcelain bottle in his hands and felt moved. Are third young master's words serious? When Murong Qianjian saw people genuinely responding to his announcement, he felt overwhelmed with joy and confidently answered back, Of course, this young master has already previously stated that this Xingde Hall is my Murong family's business. He looked down at the crowd and saw that many people were still hesitating and then looked back over at Gu Lufeng who had just picked up the flying sword and felt incredibly anxious. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Zhou Yenan who had just walked out and felt overjoyed. Toward Zhou Yenan, he arrogantly said, I recognize you. You're that dog slave that follows Murong Liufeng's side, right? I heard that there's third-ranked pills in Xingde Hall, quick bring them out for this young master. All he got in response was Zhou Yenan's cold and angry face staring back at him, not speaking nor moving. Murong Qianjian suddenly became extremely angry and began to abuse him. Damn thing, did you not hear what this young master said? Still not running to bring third-ranked pills for me? Do you trust me when I say that I'll have you kicked out of Xingde Hall? Zhou Yenan's character had always been that of a nobleman, upright and proper. At this moment, even though he had been angered so thoroughly he was shaking and his face was icy cold, his words still held courtesy when he said, "Forgive me, it's hard to comply." "What did you say?" Murong Qianjian became so angry he began to look at him with hate-filled eyes and rained down curses. "Dog slave, is it that you want to rebel? You won't even listen to my words." Zhou Yan'an deeply breathed and pushed down the anger that was bubbling forth in his heart and coldly said, "Xingde Hall has never been Murong Manor's business. It never has been and it never will be." Murong Qianjian furiously said, "Don't think that I don't know that Xingde Hall is Murong Liufeng's. Although that bast Murong Lufeng is useless, he's still my Murong family's person. I say, this Xingde Hall is Murong family's business, where am I wrong?" Zhou Yan'an sneered at him as anger became increasingly apparent in his eyes. "First of all, we only know that our previous master was called Gu Lufeng, not Murong Lufeng. So, I'm not sure what relationship Murong family would have with us. Secondly, this Xingde Hall has already been passed out to another person by our previous master. Furthermore, this young Gongzi is Xingde Hall's master's trusted aide and currently deals with all of Xingde Hall's matters. Your Murong family's endless pestering lacks all reasoning." When Murong Qianjian heard what was said, he became enraged. "Bullshit. You saying it's transferred means it's transferred? Who in Yanjing City doesn't know that Gu Lufeng is Murong Lufeng? Did he ask for Murong family's consent when he transferred ownership of the shop? As long as Murong family doesn't agree, this transfer doesn't count. What bullshit, Gongzi? It's best for him to obediently leave, otherwise if they provoke my Murong family, there won't be many good things happening to them." After saying that, he took the porcelain bottle and turned to face everyone lined up outside Xingde Hall and loudly yelled, "Did you guys clearly hear what I said? Quickly come and teach a lesson to these two youngsters. As long as you do as I say, there will be boundless pills for you." Murong Qianjian still hadn't finished speaking when a light sword streaked across. Murong Qianjian's mouth was still moving, but his head had flown up into the air. Fright slowly appeared in his eyes as he looked down at his headless body that was spewing blood everywhere. After that, he forever lost consciousness. Gu Lufeng leisurely came over to retrieve his sword and smiled. "Is there anyone else that wishes to replace our family's Gongzi as master of Xingde Hall?" The people from influential families, who had been restless up until now, kept quiet out of fear and didn't even dare to speak half a word. Shisan walked over to the crowd with a face full of smiles. "Everybody, Yanjing City prohibits fighting, but everyone here clearly saw that we were the victims today. This group of people were the first to act against us. When the Imperial Guard comes to investigate, everyone has to help us out. Ah." In addition, in order to make up for the fright everyone just received, the amount of pills available for purchase today is up by 10%. Once Shisan made this announcement, everyone felt overjoyed at the news and immediately threw all matters related to the fight to the very back of their minds. The amount of pills available to be sold was just increased by 10%, this meant that their chances of buying pills also became larger. Hashi slowly made her way over to the four martial artists that had been humiliated and beaten by Murong Qianjian and threw out a few pill bottles to them. The four people woodenly accepted the bottle. Soon after, they opened the lids and sucked in a breath. Heavens! It was actually best quality pills, 3 whole best quality pills. The four people held onto the pills with shaking hands. The martial artist who had been beaten first said with a trembling voice, "What? What did we do to deserve this? This is what you deserve." Hashi indifferently continued explaining, "It's also to express thanks for you for protecting Xingde Hall." The four people looked at each other and felt overjoyed. But, they all felt that they had just bumped into unexpected good luck. The martial artists waiting in line outside were so vexed they pounded their chests. If they had known earlier, they would have helped out Xingde Hall just then, they would have been the first person to rush up. That was 3 best quality pills, ah. It was worth several tens of thousands of crystals and they had missed it just like that. It was truly unlucky. He then slowly made her way to the entrance of Xingde Hall before turning around and clearly saying to everyone, "My Xingde Hall only sells pills, it doesn't take notice of nor participate in any other affairs. But if someone doesn't watch where they're going and decides to come provoke us, we'll make sure that they'll forever be unable to open their eyes again." Once she said these words, spiritual power suddenly surged in Hexi's weak body, putting powerful pressure on her surroundings. Once this powerful pressure came out, all of the low-level martial artists immediately began to tremble and some of the more cowardly ones even fell flat on their butt. Nascent soul, he's actually at nascent soul stage. Nobody expected that this youth, who was more elegant than young ladies and weaker than women, to have a cultivation at nascent soul stage. For a few moments, everyone kept quiet out of fear and looked at Hexi with reverence. Hexi no longer spoke and faintly smiled at the sight. Then, she turned around and made her way to Xingde Hall's inner courtyard with Gu Lufeng following behind her. As for the people outside Xingde Hall, they resumed to line up and wait for their turn. Once they entered the back courtyard, Gu Lufeng couldn't help but curiously ask, "Little Yuer, you can actually emit a nascent soul stage's spiritual pressure? How exactly did you do that?" Hexi merely mysteriously smiled. Mountain people possess brilliant schemes. Once she said that, she didn't bother waiting for Gu Liufeng's response before minding her own business and leaving. Chapter 452 Naylan Family's Thoughts. In reality, Hexi wasn't actually at nascent soul stage, but she did have Wu Xian, her personal guard, that was at nascent soul stage. She had Wu Xian pour intense spiritual power into a jade slip. This type of pressure from spiritual power contained a nascent soul stage's power within it. However, common martial artists' mind states were completely different from martial artists at nascent soul stage, even if the martial artist was at gold core stage. Therefore, it would be impossible for them to fight against the pressure from a nascent soul stage's spiritual power. But, Hexi was not the ordinary martial artist. She had a primal chaos dantian which, in itself, naturally had spiritual power that far surpassed common martial artists. Adding on to the fact that her divine knowledge was especially strong and her mental strength had been trained in the Zijin Palace. So, if she wished to offset the pressure Wu Xian's spiritual power gave her, it was quite simple for her. Briefly releasing the pressure in front of that crowd would be sufficient enough to send fear into those martial artists' hearts, and for a short amount of time, it would prevent people from intentionally provoking Xingde Hall. Naylan Manor, Study Room. At this moment, the study room only had two people inside, Naylan Zhengze and Naylan family's third elder, Naylan Qingming, who was sitting opposite to him. The atmosphere inside the study was extremely still. In front of the two people, there was a best quality repairing spirit pill that had just been bought by a subordinate from Xingde Hall. With a grave expression, Naylan Qingming picked up the pill and said, "You're certain that this pill and that slut, cough, and the ones that woman left behind are the same?" Naylan Zhengze shook his head and replied, "Not entirely. This pill's essence purity and spiritual power is higher than the ones in Lingyu left behind, but the smell both pills contain are very similar." Naylan Qingming ground his teeth. Could that woman have truly left behind a prescription for others? But that would be impossible. Near the time of her death, she had been closely monitored by us. Or could it be that that child, which had been unaccounted for at that time, had received all of An Lingyu's remnants? Naylan Zhengze shook his head and with a heavy voice he asked, asking third elder to help investigate this Xingde Hall's master's identity. "You also know that first elder never came back after going to Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory. Nowadays, I can only trust you, third elder." When he thought about Naylan Yanming going missing in Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory, Naylan Qingming's face held annoyance. Now, the only remaining gold core stage martial artists in Naylan family are you and I. If we continue on like this, how will we maintain our position as one of the four biggest families? You're the clan head, do you think there's any way to revive Naylan family? If there isn't, I think it's better to abdicate. Naylan Zhengze felt his forehead throbbing. His eyes turned overcast and ruthless waves of light flashed through it. But by the time he raised his head, his expression had turned humble. He looked like someone from a younger generation who dutifully listened to the teachings of older generations. Thanking third elder's instructions, I've already thought it through. In a few days, Ziyun complete his studies in his sect and return. When that time comes, I will bring Heshi back, who lives in B courtyard, and let the pair of brother and sister have a reunion. Nalan Qingming's eyebrows rose and soon after, he let out a meaningful laugh. That's right, they're brother and sister, naturally we must have them properly reunited. Perhaps we'll be able to discover something then. However, once his mind wandered to the state of Nalan family, Nalan Qingming's smiling expression immediately disappeared and he became resentful. If you want your position as clan head to remain steady, it's best for you to retrieve that woman's prescriptions and works as soon as possible. Otherwise, at that time, you couldn't treat Ouyang Haoshuan's illness and even vowed that nobody would be able to treat it. Then, you withdrew from the marriage agreement third miss had with him. In the end, Ouyang Haoshuan is fully recovered from his illness today and his strength is especially vigorous. Now, everyone in Yanjing City laughs that your divine doctor identity doesn't match reality. He's saying you respectfully. If outsiders find out that Nalan family's madam is insane and Nalan Jingza, Jinling country's divine physician, can't heal the madam of her illness, I say you can forget wishing that your head position stays, even your rank as a fourth-ranked doctor would be hard to maintain. When he finished saying what he wanted to, he didn't look at Nalan Jingza's ugly expression. Instead, he coldly snorted and flicked his sleeves before leaving. Left behind to sit alone, Nalan Jingza's gaze rested on the flickering candle. The meat on his face pulsed as his expression turned sinister and twisted. And Lingyu. Nalan Heshi. Remnants. He could definitely retrieve them. After all, he still had the most important information in his hands that he could use against her. At the same time, after having received best quality pills in the faraway Tsangming country's Feng family, fog and mist rose up in spirals around the mountains, like a fairy. Rich spiritual qi circulated in the mountains and forests of this area. Feng Tianba and Feng Yunjing both sat upright on one of the rocks. They were looking at a distant figure that could barely be discerned through the fog and mist. Feng Tianba was silent for a good moment. After he saw that the people inside didn't make any noise, he couldn't help but ask, "Honored sir, how is it?" For a short amount of time, it was silent amongst the clouds and mist. Then, from a distant place, a muffled voice slowly said, "The pill's level is very high, even with my current level of cultivation, I wouldn't be able to get such a high purity. I don't doubt that a refining pharmacist that would be able to refine such a pill exists, but as far as I know, they've never made an appearance on Miluo continent." Feng Tianba and Feng Yunjing sucked in a breath when they heard those words and both of their faces held shock. In the clouds and mist, that person carried on, "Although this pill is precious, it's a pity that what? It's pitiful that the pill's level is so low. If someone at Meridian stage took this pill, there wouldn't be much of an effect on them." The muffled voice muttered to themselves for a moment before lightly snorting, but a person able to refine pills to this grade can't only be able to refine first-rank pills. Most likely, they're just deliberately choosing not to sell higher-ranked pills. Feng Tianba nodded his head then asked another question, "Honored sir, may I ask what that easing tendons pill is? I scoured through countless ancient texts and couldn't find any trace of this medicine on Miluo continent. Do you think this pill is from that pill prescription that was previously rumored to be from Sealed Dragon Domain?" In the mist and clouds, a voice filled with certainty immediately answered his question, "It's very probable. As far as I know, a pill used to improve martial artists' meridians hasn't appeared on Miluo continent before." "Oh right, regarding the person who inherited Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory, have you guys been able to find any information on them?" "No." Feng Tianba regretfully and guiltily shook his head in response. "We've investigated everyone who entered the secret territory, but no matter how we look at it, none of them would have had the ability or opportunity to receive Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory. Even Nan Gongyu, who was the strongest person to go to the secret territory that day, wouldn't have had the time to receive control of the secret territory because he spent the first half of the time with Nie Jinchen and Feng Lianing. Feng Yunjing, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly opened his mouth. "Honored sir, may I ask if this refining pharmacist could have any relation to genius Dr. Shi? Whether or not they have a connection, I'm not sure." The person concealed within the clouds and mist continued, "However, if the genius Dr. Shi you speak of is at foundation establishment stage, then she couldn't possibly be the refining pharmacist. This is because it would be impossible for her to refine such a pure pill with such outcomes using her spiritual fire. That person has to have reached a rank equal to mine, at least in refining, and at the very least, their cultivation has to be at gold core stage." Chapter 468. Not reciprocating would be rude. However, the muffled voice paused for a second before continuing on. "There isn't that much coincidence in the world. That genius Dr. Shi you speak of has too perfect timing. Even if he isn't the refining pharmacist, he certainly has a connection with the refining pharmacist. Go secretly dig for information, but before you find out what's happening on the opponent's side, don't act blindly." At once, Feng Tianba and Feng Yunjing stood up from their sitting positions and bowed toward the voice. "Yes, honored sir." Then, the two people slowly walked away from this foggy mountain and river area. On the way back, Feng Tianba said, "Yunjing, this time when you go to Jinling country, you must discover genius Dr. Shi's identity. The best scenario would be to bring him back to Feng family." "I understand, father." Feng Yunjing coldly agreed to the order and bowed his head, but a flash of cutting edge went through his eyes went undetected when he did so. "Shiyu, wait for me. Soon, I'll make you into one of my people." In the dead of the night, two figures silently landed on the window sill of Xingde Hall's second floor. Gu Lufeng, who had originally been sleeping soundly on the second floor, seemed to have experienced some sort of reaction. Suddenly awakening, he spoke into the darkness with a deep, quiet voice, "Who is it?" Under the moon's weak light a beautiful and delicate youthful face appeared, and behind her there was a detached and bitingly cold male that was faintly perceptible. Surprised, Gu Lufeng said, "Little Yuer, how come it's you?" He lightly jumped off the window sill and landed in front of Gu Lufeng. By now, Gu Lufeng snapped out of his initial shock, and a smile that wasn't a smile could faintly be seen on his face as he teased, "Little Yuer, it's the dead of the night and you're rushing into my room. Are you planning to sneak attack me? Really, if little Yuer wants my hug, it's available to you at any time." Once Gu Lufeng said these words, He still hadn't responded, but behind her, the man's face had turned completely frozen. An imposing manner erupted from his body shortly after, and an immense pressure began to build up in the room. Even the temperature dropped several degrees. His eyes were like pairs of ice as he ruthlessly stared Gu Lufeng down. "Young Master Gu, please act accordingly. How can our Wang Fei be someone you can tease as you please? If you continue to speak so rudely, don't blame me for being impolite." Before Gu Lufeng could respond, He ruthlessly gave a cold glance at both of them and coldly said, "Shut up. Get down to business." Wu Xian and Gu Lufeng both looked at each other. The latter rubbed his nose and mischievously laughed. "Little Yuer, your guard really can't take a joke, he's just like his family's master." Out of the corner of her eye, He saw that Wu Xian was about to erupt from anger and promptly began to defuse the situation. "Don't be noisy. This is Wu Xian, his cultivation is at nascent soul stage. In order to protect us during our operation tonight, he'll be following behind us." Flabbergasted, Gu Lufeng asked, "What operation?" In Heshi's eyes, a hint of icy edge appeared in her eyes as she serenely answered, "Isn't there still have information in Murong Manor that can be used against you? It just so happens that it's overdue for me to give Murong Lin Feng, that mother and son pair, their easing tendons pill." Adding on to this was their visit, or provocation, today. "It'd be rude of us not to reciprocate. It would be good for us to return the compliment tonight." Gu Liufeng's eyes suddenly brightened and his mood surged up and down. When he spoke, His voice was slightly shaking. "Little you." Although Heshi's words were cold, Gu Lufeng knew that if it weren't for the information that could be used against him and his own hatred, Heshi would not take the risk to go back to Murong Manor, nor would she bring along one of Ming Wang Manor's nascent soul stage guards. The purple vine in Heshi's hands flew out and wrapped itself around Gu Liufeng's body. Sneering, "Since Murong family dares to court risks, tonight will nicely help them succeed." Chapter 469 Murong Feng studied. Just after saying this, her entire person jumped out of the window and began floating high up in the sky. Then, using Qinggong, she flew across the roof and into the darkness with Gu Lufeng following behind. Wu Xian's person silently disappeared into the night without a trace. It was just as if he was never there. Before half an incense stick finished burning, both Heshi and Gu Lufeng had arrived at Murong Manor. Just like before, there were many guards in Murong Manor. However, unlike last time when she had come to save Gu Lufeng, all the guards seemed more relaxed. Using his divine knowledge, Gu Lufeng quietly and carefully swept his eyes over the entire manor. After he confirmed that there were no martial artists stronger than himself, he let out a breath that he didn't realize he had been holding. This proved that ash-cloaked man Heshi encountered the previous time wasn't in Murong Manor at the current moment. The two people relaxed, made themselves comfortable on the roof. Gu Lufeng leaned closer to Heshi and whispered in her ear, "I don't know where they stored the information that could be used against me. However, from my memories, I remember that Murong family has a forbidden area in the manor. In my childhood, I recall that Murong Linfeng accidentally went in there once and even he had been firmly chided afterward." "Where is it?" Gu Liufeng's eyes darkened at the question. "It's Murong Feng's study." Murong Feng was Gu Liufeng's father, at the very least he was his father by blood. It was just that this so-called father was a brute that tortured both him and his mother. Gu Lufeng paused and deeply sucked in a breath before continuing, "Each month, Murong Feng goes into the study for a long time. Once there was even a time where he brought my mother into the study. But after my mother came back, she became even crazier and every inch of her skin was damaged. How could an ordinary person stay in the study for such a long time?" Heshi knit her brow and continued, "Only if it wasn't a study in the first place. Wouldn't it be better if we went there first to explore around the area?" The two people's figures flashed and noiselessly began heading in the direction of Murong Feng's study. The area surrounding the study had much more guards compared to the rest of the manor. There was also a faint gloomy feeling hovering in the sky that didn't go away for a long time. Heshi's brow raised and she took the little gold dragon out of her space. When the little golden dragon heard Heshi's summons, it felt extremely happy. In this shumi mustard subspace, there was Dan who had the miraculous ability to refine pills. Then, there was Little Purple who was a little expert in fighting. All that was left was itself, a freeloader with nothing to offer. He was the grand golden dragon. Ah! How could he be beat by a purple vine and a little pig? "Lauda, don't hesitate to tell me instructions. Do you want me to completely wipe out these guards?" "You can rest assured, just give me the time it takes a stick of incense to burn and I'll perfectly complete the task." Heshi seemed to completely ignore its enthusiasm and merely indifferently said, "I remember you saying that you can change figures after advancing past 5th rank? Change into..." She paused and glanced at the little golden dragon's thin body and swaying claws before proceeding to instruct, "Change into a lizard and enter this study. Once inside, explore everything inside and report back." Once the little golden dragon heard her orders, it immediately opened its mouth to lowly shout, "Lauda, I'm a dragon, not a snake. Not even just a dragon, I'm a golden dragon. How can you ask others to change into a lizard? This is asking me to lower my status too much. Oh, you aren't willing. I'll just forget about it. In the future when I make any foods, you can also, don't. Once it heard Heshi mentioning her foods, the little golden dragon panicked. Immediately, it pointed its finger at the sky and vowed, "Lauda, rest assured. Isn't it just turning into a lizard and exploring the area? If I'm unable to complete this, then I'm not fit to be your Xiao Di. Once it made its vow, it seemed as if it was scared that Heshi would change her mind, and its figure flashed. Soon after, an ordinary black lizard appeared in its place. Chapter 470 Brutes. The little golden dragon now had the ability to transform itself into other animals. However, it was limited to small animals and animals that had similar body types to its own. If it were to transform into a large elephant, its spiritual power would be wiped out in just 3 seconds, and it would return back to its original form. The ordinary, black lizard ran over to the front of Murong Feng's study. Then, it slipped in through one of the cracks without anyone noticing. After a short amount of time passed, Heshi was contacted by the little golden dragon and received news. Lauda, it's absolutely empty in here, there are no people. But, I do sense in cold permeating below this room. Heshi and Gu Lufeng both turned to look at each other. A rock quietly flew out of Heshi's sleeves and went under a distant underbrush. Chi La sounded out in the quiet night, alarming the surrounding guards. The few people quietly shouted, "Who is it?" Each of the guards began to make their way over to the direction of the underbrush. At the same time, Heshi and Gu Lufeng seized the opportunity to slip into the study unnoticed. Simultaneously, the purple vine came out and created a barrier around the study. "Little Yuer, quickly come and see." Gu Liufeng's voice suddenly echoed in Heshi's ears. Heshi turned around and saw that his hand was pressing down on a black, flying serpent sculpture. The soaring serpent sculpture was resting on a shelf that displayed various other antiques. If one merely glanced at the sculpture in passing, it would be considered completely ordinary. But, if one carefully examined it, they would discover that this flying serpent sculpture actually wasn't made out of iron or jade. Its surface was exceedingly glossy, as if people frequently touched it. Gu Liufeng's face became heavier and he slowly remarked, "I once witnessed Murong Feng cleaning the dust off this soaring serpent." Once he said this, his hands suddenly violently turned the flying serpent's head around. Immediately after he did so, "Ka-ka" sounds were heard. A moment later, the shelf moved on either side, opening up a dark passageway. The passage used limestone slates as steps. When these were stepped on, it caused a bone-chilling feeling to emerge in a person. Both of their faces were grave. Following the steps, they quickly walked further down. Soon, Heshi was able to hear several young children's voices crying and begging for forgiveness. "I'm begging you guys, spare me. Spare me. I don't want money and I don't want to eat. Please spare me, woo woo woo, elder brother, I feel very unwell. I can't breathe. Elder brother, you guys are brutes. Don't touch my younger sister. Younger sister. Younger sister. You guys are a group of brutes, you won't receive good deaths." The two looked at each other for a second before they stopped making all sounds. Then, they quickly hid themselves in the shadows and watched what was happening under the light. The scene caused Gu Lufeng to suck in a breath. His face became incomparably dark and angry. Even Heshi, who was used to such bloody and cruel scenes, deeply pursed her brows. From their position they could see that the nearby basement had been divided into 2 separate sections. The left side was set up like a refining pills room. Several grisly bearded old men were currently maintaining a spiritual fire whilst watching the circumstances in the pill cauldron. It was just that the right side of this basement was like a bloody slaughterhouse, creating a stark contrast with the left side. There were over 100 cages that were all densely packed on the floor. In each cage there were 2 children locked inside. There were a mix of boys and girls in the cages. The oldest children Heshi could see were about 8 or 9 years old, while the youngest seemed to be 3 or 4 years old. They looked like animals that were just shoved and locked in a cage. Some of the children were crying, others were begging for forgiveness, a few were angrily shouting insults, and there were even a couple that were blankly staring off into space, completely at a loss at what to do. Beside all of the cages there were 7 or 8 children suspended in the air. Each of their carotid arteries, major blood vessels in the neck, had been cut open, allowing for blood to freely flow out. The blood dripped down into a copper basin on the floor, taking only moments to completely fill to the brim. Chapter 471 Little Boy Warning. This chapter is somewhat graphic and contains upsetting content/topics, read at your own risk. In the beginning, the pitiful kids were still able to scream and howl in pain. But as time went on, all their blood had flowed out and their faces were pale, they were no longer able to speak, and in the midst of all the pain, they lost their lives. But even at this state, those uncivilized brutes still didn't let them off. While their corpses were still warm, those uncivilized brutes cut off pieces of their flesh, in practiced motions, and threw them into another basin. If there was still a few drops of blood, they would carefully let it drip into the blood-filled basin before throwing the flesh into the second one. The entire process seemed extremely practiced, it almost felt as if they were machinery. It looked like an assembly line at a factory and felt like they had done this 100,000 times before. When all of the children had been taken care of, those uncivilized brutes let out a few devilish laughs. They then turned around to walk toward the cages full of children. The children all moved backward in their cages, pushing themselves against the back of the cage walls in an attempt to hide themselves. They let out mournful shrieks, trying to evade this miserable destiny. But when those brutes heard the children's screams, it seemed to add to their happiness. One of the brutes grabbed onto a 5 or 6-year-old little girl and held her up. Holding onto her legs, he held her completely upside down while examining her. As he did so, he burst into giddy laughter. Look at this little girl's tender flesh. When all her blood has dripped out and we've finished skinning her, let's roast her meat and eat it. It must be the world's finest delicacy. Mine isn't that bad either. Another one of the men grabbed onto a 4-year-old boy's collar. In one motion, he took the boy's clothes off. Swallowing his saliva, he commented, "Look how tender his flesh is. If we use it to cook stew, this meat will certainly be tasty and soft, it'll be a delicacy." When the two children heard their words, they became even more terrified and began to loudly cry. They struggled to get out, but they looked like chicks in an eagle's talons. What possibility could they have of escaping? The two people who captured the children burst into loud laughter. They looked at the children's struggling appearances and seemed to get immense satisfaction from it. Suddenly, one of the men felt a sharp pain on their lower leg. Following this, the little boy he had been holding in the air was snatched away. The uncivilized brute angrily lowered his head to look at who had done it and quickly looked into a pair of fierce eyes that resembled those of wolf cubs. All he saw was a boy that was roughly 8 or 9 years old. He wore tattered clothes and his whole face was full of mud and dust. The sharp pain he had felt just then had come from this boy's teeth biting his leg. The boy then took advantage of the fact that he was distracted and quickly snatched the little boy out of his grip. "You son of a bi, are you impatient of living? You actually dare to bite me?" Soon after, the uncivilized brute raised his palm and ruthlessly swung at the boy's face. All that was heard was a loud "paw" sound as the little boy was thrown back into the cage with a bleeding mouth. But, like before, he still glared at the uncivilized man without a hint of cowering in his eyes. He even hid 3 children behind him. Painted on his face was a look of fierceness, displaying that he wasn't afraid to die. Very good. The man was provoked by the look in his eyes and sneered at him. "Since you want to court death, I'll help you become a dried corpse." As he was speaking, he crouched down and ruthlessly dragged the boy out of the cage. The 3 children hidden behind the boy started to wail, crying out, "Gidge." Using all of their strength, they held on to the boy's clothes in a desperate attempt to prevent him from being taken away. However, how could their strength compare to the uncivilized man? The little boy was very quickly picked up like a chick and dragged out of the cage. "Smelly boy, soon you'll know the result of offending me." "Ayo. Smelly boy, you actually dared to scratch me." Soon after, 5 bloody marks appeared on the man's face and he felt a painful ache coming from his face. The man's sorry state brought on all of his companions' laughter, filling the entire room with their chuckles. Chen Laozi, the longer you live, the dumber you become. You can't even handle a little brat. He's saying me arrogantly. Chapter 472. Killing a superior. Chen Laozi suddenly became even more enraged, irritated from his comrades' teasing. Raising the child even higher up in the air, he motioned to ruthlessly slam the child onto the ground. Ai, Chen Laozi, don't become befuddled. Master spent countless pills to obtain these children in order to turn them into culture fluid. The culture fluid must survive. If you allow the precious culture fluid to fall to its death, you'd have to be careful not to let the master skin you. Chen Laozi's face turned sinister and abruptly pressed the child down on a chopping block. He looked down at the child with an evil smile painted on his face. Even if I can't kill him, I can chop his hands and feet off. Letting his blood flow a little bit won't cause harm, right? Eldest brother. Don't kill eldest brother. Woo woo woo. The children from that cage let out heart-tearing cries when they heard what the man said. The boy that was held down on the chopping board also struggled under Chen Laozi's hold, but his strength was no match for Chen Laozi's. The little boy looked up and saw Chen Laozi raising the large knife higher and higher. Then, he watched as the knife began nearing himself more and more. Without another option, the little boy closed his eyes in desperation. But, after a few moments, he felt none of the pain he had originally anticipated. Instead, he heard a loud, peng sound come from the side of his ear. It was the sound of the large knife falling to the floor. Following this, the entire basement became chaotic. The little boy cautiously opened his eyes to see and saw two figures slowly walking over from outside the dark and light boundary. The person walking in front had delicate, handsome features, but their face held an unsightly, bright red scar. In his hand he held a flying sword that was bursting with coldness. As for Chen Laozi, who was just about to chop his limbs off, he was already rolling around on the floor, clutching onto the bloody remnants of his arm and screaming out in agony. Who are you guys? Do you know what place this is? The basement had turned chaotic and disorderly. Even the several old men who were originally refining pills had come over to check out the huge commotion. Gu Lufeng sneered in response to the question. He looked at these brutes who looked human but were nothing more than beasts at heart. The longer he looked at them, the more the hatred and loathing became apparent in his eyes. I've come to take your life. Right after he said this, he began waving his cold sword around. The sword moved too fast to be seen by the naked eye. Instead, the only thing that could be seen was a light trail following closely behind it. Due to the speed at which Gu Lufeng swung his sword, it looked as if there were fireworks in the air around him. Screams of pain followed the sword's light, wherever it went was where the screams sounded out. Broken limbs, snapped arms, and blood spatters flew all over the room, turning it into a bloody hell. The entire time, He stood to the side and leisurely watched on. There wasn't a trace of evidence that she was going to help. Unexpectedly, before she even moved her hand, a small person's shadow advanced toward an old man who was just about to press a mechanism and knocked him out of the way. The pill-refining old man fell to the floor and began screaming out in pain. At this time, the little boy hopped off the chopping block and took a machete along with him. He walked over to the man and began to ruthlessly chop at on the old man. Blood splattered everywhere and the warm, fishy-smelling substance sprayed onto the little boy's face. For a moment, he blanked out before returning back to his senses. There wasn't an iota of fear in his eyes, there was only a thick sense of hatred. The little boy felt eyes on the back of his head and turned around to see, only to meet Heshi's smiling yet not smiling eyes. The youth residing outside of the dark and light boundary had clean, white jade-like skin and bright red lips. But, their eyes oozed iciness, it felt like crystal-clear spring water that was both remote and cold. Those bright red lips were slightly turned up. The expression they looked at him with was so aloof, so indifferent, yet it was what enticed him into wanting to approach them more, to long to near them. Chapter 473 Filthy Person. The little boy wiped the blood off his face and proceeded to stick his chest out. He set off the feeling of, "I'm not scared at all," whilst staring directly at Hashi. This tsundere act he put on caused Hashi to be unable to stop herself from laughing out loud. The little boy's face turned red and he immediately turned around to run away. Still carrying the machete, he ran over to the front of the cages and began to directly hack at the locks on them. Once he opened them, he took each of the children out, one by one. By this time, Gu Lufeng had already single-handedly brought all of the people in the basement down. He stood atop the mountain of corpses in the sea of blood with his long sword directly pointed at one of the old men who refined pills and coldly questioned, "Tell me, what was the purpose of you kidnapping and bringing so many children here?" Spare my life, Taoist immortal Ah. We were only hired here to refine supplement spirit and cleaning spirit pills for these children, we don't know anything else Ah. Begging Taoist immortal to spare my life. We're actually all Murong family's people, if you killed us, Murong family wouldn't let you off. If there are children of immortals in this group and Taoist immortal takes them away, before the old man could complete his sentence Gu Lufeng had already cut his head off. His head flew off and onto the floor. Just like this, the man breathed his last breath. He then walked over to Chen Laoba, whose hand had been cut off. Pressing the pointed edge of the blade against his neck, he slowly asked, "Tell me, what does Murong Feng want to do with all these children? And where did you steal all these children from?" Chen Laoba had already watched with his own eyes as Gu Lufeng killed and slaughtered all his companions. He had long already been scared witless, pooping and peeing on the floor as he watched. He cradled his own snapped-off arm and with a trembling voice he said, I don't know anything. We're only in charge of removing blood from these children's bodies. The people above require 3 basins full of blood every day, moreover, the blood must be from virgin males and females who possess spiritual roots. As to what exactly the blood is for, we don't know Ah. Gu Liufeng's eyes shifted over to the blood-filled copper basins. They were about the size of a well and knee-high. This much blood. How many virgin boys and girls were required to fill these up? Gu Lufeng coldly stated, "You guys were able to bring so many children here. Especially children with spiritual roots, they're street urchins." 1. Chen Laoba paused to bite his trembling teeth before continuing to elaborate, "For the most part, they're street urchins, though there are some that were stolen away from villages. As long as the child possesses the slightest bit of spiritual root, we'll try our best to get our hands on them." Gu Lufeng deeply sucked in a breath at the news. Then he suddenly lowly began to laugh, "Little Yuer, do you see it now? This is Murong family, one of Yanjing City's 4 biggest families. He, surprisingly my body possesses such filthy blood." Hashi slowly walked over to Gu Lufeng. At the same time, the purple vine flew out from her wrist and pierced into Chen Laoba's body. Chen Laoba was overwhelmed with shock. After, his eyes widened as he felt the blood in his body slowly being absorbed by that purple vine. Spare my life." His words were hoarse and broken, but as more and more of his blood was sucked out of his body, he lacked even the power to speak words. Chen Laoba remembered that he had once cut some of the children's throats like so. He watched as they struggled, howled in pain, and still watched as their blood slowly flowed out, eventually bringing an end to their young lives. At the time he was so excited, so proud of himself Ah. But now times had changed and karma had come so quickly. Once the purple abyss vine finished sucking the body dry, successfully turning it into a dried-out corpse, it shook its leaves and disdainfully cast the body aside. It then flew over to Hashi, happily returning into her hands. Hashi moved to pet the vine's shaking leaves before turning to address Gu Lufeng, slowly saying, "On the world there isn't filthy blood, only filthy people. Nobody can determine their birth, but at the very least, we can determine what path we walk on. 1. Street urchin, a child who spends most, if not all, of their time on the streets, usually located in slum areas. Chapter 474 Losing Business Deal. Gu Lufeng was startled when he heard Heshi's words, then he thought about Heshi's life. His eyes gleamed and he heavily nodded his head. Since his blood was so filthy, he should personally go destroy the source of this filthy blood. Heshi let the purple abyss vine loose to clean up any people still alive in this basement and prepared to leave. Just as they were ascending the stairs, a child's clear voice sounded from behind them. "Elder brother, can we follow you guys out?" Heshi turned back around and saw the same little boy that had just taken a knife and hacked at the old man. His small head was tilted up as he looked at them with stubborn eyes. Standing behind the boy were quite a few children, but in their eyes, there was cowardice. They were like the little tail behind the little boy. Gu Lufeng looked over at Heshi and didn't say anything. Heshi was now his master, naturally these situations would be handled as she saw fit. Both of Heshi's hands wrapped around her chest. She coldly looked at the little boy and asked, "Why would I allow you to follow me?" Because I can help you when I grow up." When the boy first started out, he nervously stuttered, but as he continued making his point, he became more and more confident. His eyes were wide open and they reflected determination. We can give our bodies to you, in a working sense. We'll work for you in the future. Moreover, I'm aware that outside this prison there is a large courtyard. Even if we wished to run we wouldn't be able to. We need to follow you guys because you guys are very strong. Gu Lufeng considered for a moment before softly saying to Heshi, "These children are the results of Murong family's evil doings. I want to return them back to their mother's and father's sides." When Gu Lufeng saw Heshi nod at his idea, he then turned to address the children, "You guys should first obediently wait here. When we finish sorting out all our matters, we'll come back to fetch you. From there, we'll work on sending you back to your mother's and father's sides." The distant kids, who were originally scared, cried tears of joy when they heard Gu Lufeng's announcement. Some even went as far as to kowtow toward Gu Lufeng and Heshi. They didn't know how many days had passed since they had been captured, but they had long given up all hope. They thought they wouldn't have the chance to see their relatives anymore in this lifetime. But who would have known that they would be able to come back from death's door? Not could they escape this fate, but they also had the chance to return to their families again. After the children relaxed, they couldn't help but all hug each other and cry. Gu Lufeng felt a headache coming and rubbed his head. He was just about to pull Heshi and leave when he heard the same little boy start speaking again. "We don't have a family, nor do we have a place to return to. We only wish to follow elder brother. Begging elder brother to bring us along." Heshi's eyebrows jumped and her eyes showed traces of astonishment. The children at the very back were joyously crying because they were going to return back to their mothers and fathers. But the boy at the very front, as well as a few of the children standing directly behind him, had completely clear eyes. There wasn't a bit of envy or timidness in their eyes. Heshi used her divine knowledge to sweep over these few children's bodies and discovered that their aptitudes weren't bad. The worst child had 3 spiritual roots. The best one was that little boy. He actually had dual attributes of wind and fire. Not only that, his spiritual root's essence purity was quite high. Heshi hugged her chest. "Right now you guys are useless. If I took you in, I would have to feed and clothe you. Wouldn't this be a losing business deal?" At once, the little boy refuted her words. "After we've become strong we can give our lives to you. It doesn't matter what you want us to do, we'll do anything." Heshi sneered at him. "How do I know whether or not you're able to become strong? If I was to raise you until you're older and you turn out to be a group of thankless wretches, wouldn't I be eating a big loss then? We aren't thankless wretches. We are good children. We'll listen to you." The children behind the little boy weakly retorted Heshi's questions. The little boy clenched his teeth and raised his head to say, "Or, you can turn me into a slave. I know all martial artists can have slaves. This way you don't have to be worried about whether or not I'll run away, right?" The corner of Heshi's eyes slightly jumped. "Do you know what it means to be turned into a slave?" Spirit soul slaves must draw out a part of their soul. This means that if you want to cultivate in the future, you won't be able to amount to much. The little boy's face twisted with pain when Heshi said that, but when he turned back around to look at the naive faces of the children behind him, he still clenched his teeth and told Heshi, "I'm willing to be your slave, but you have to agree to let all of us follow you. Moreover, you can't turn them into slaves." They both stared at each other, neither backing down. There was obvious fear in the little boy's eyes and his body was shaking, but despite this, he didn't hesitate. At last, a satisfied expression appeared on Heshi's face. She took out a porcelain bottle and threw one at him, faintly saying, "If you became a spirit soul slave, your strength would greatly decline. Why would I raise a useless piece of rubbish, to play with it? Since you guys are so confident that you won't betray me, each of you has to swallow one of these pills. This is a medicine that I refined myself, its purpose is to control people's hearts. As long as you don't change your mind and decide to betray me, the poison won't flare up. But if there's any disloyalty on your part, this pill will let you taste the feeling of being unable to beg for your life nor for your death. How about it, are you guys still willing to swallow it?" The little boy held onto the porcelain bottle and hesitatingly said, "We all have to eat it?" "Of course." Heshi faintly laughed, "Granted, even if you're able to guarantee that these children won't betray me today, what about in 10 or 100 years? I stick by my words, I refuse to raise a bunch of thankless wretches." "Okay, we'll swallow it." The little boy clenched his teeth and opened the porcelain bottle. He poured one pill out and then swallowed the entire thing in one go. For the most part, the children behind him were all still ignorant to what was going on. When they saw the little boy swallowing the pill, they each obediently grabbed one pill from the boy and swallowed it, yet they didn't know what the pill was for. Satisfied, Heshi nodded her head. "Very good. Since this is the case, stay here first and wait with those other little fellows. Once we're done dealing with our matters, we'll come get you all." When the little boy heard of Heshi's plan, his face immediately showed doubt and he nervously asked, "We all swallowed your medicine, you won't go back on your word, right?" Since a young age, he had roamed around alone. He'd long grown accustomed to adults' mean features. Even if the elder brother in front of him caused him to unconsciously want to draw closer, he still held some suspicions in his heart. Heshi sneered, "If I were to abandon you guys, would you be able to keep up with me? Would it be necessary for me to waste a bottle of pills?" After she finished speaking, she didn't wait for the little boy to reply before grabbing onto Gu Lufeng. Their bodies both flashed and then disappeared. Dazed, the little boy stood still and stared at the spot Heshi and Gu Lufeng were just at. Then, he snapped out of it and wiped at his still bloody-smelling face. Grinding his teeth, he muttered, We'll just wait here. Elder brother will definitely quickly come and bring us out." These words were comforting to all the children in the basement, including himself. In the dark prison, Murong Feng's hands gripped onto a lash that had been dipped in salt water and firmly wiped a woman on the floor. The woman's hair was in disarray, her whole face was blood-stained, and her body was full of bruises. As she was being whipped, she couldn't make any sounds aside from howling and crying. Murong Feng retrieved his whip and ruthlessly kicked the woman. Then, he walked over to the nearby torture shelf. The slender figure bound on the shelf had half a mask hanging off his face and his body was also entirely bruised. Chapter 476 Torture. His eyes were filled with pleading and dread and his mouth was wide open. But even after it was wide open for a while, no sounds came out. Murong Feng looked at the man that had been bound by black iron chains and sneered, "How is it, Murong Lufeng? Do you still not wish to surrender? Do you want to continue watching your mother being whipped?" The man bound up desperately wanted to speak, but even though his mouth was wide open, he couldn't say a word. He was so frustrated that even tears began to roll down his face. But apart from twisting his face, he couldn't make any other sounds. Forget it. Murong Feng serenely said, "I originally wanted to ask about that genius Dr. Shi's identity. But since you can't see good from bad, I'll just act as if I never had you, this son. As Murong Fong was speaking, his face exposed a sinister and demonic expression. In one fell swoop, he ripped the man's half-on mask off. Soon, a beautiful face appeared in front of him, but his face was riddled with bright red scars. Now that our Murong family has the cold food pill prescription, that genius doctor she isn't significant anymore. But you're just like that coquettish and sly mother of yours. Since birth till now, you've seduced countless people, correct? Since it's like this, I'll just send you to the Black Law Protector, Mr. Liao. He loves to play with handsome men the most. If he's happy with you, he'll feel more inclined to give us pill prescriptions that are better than cold food. You unfilial son can be considered to have made some contribution to Murong family, he. As Murong Fong was speaking, the man tied to the torture rack opened his eyes wide and his whole body was shaking. Once Murong Fong finished his sentence, he immediately began to struggle. His mouth was wide open, as if he wanted to yell out. However, apart from the clanking of the black iron chains, his throat seemed as if it had been pinched closed. Apart from ear-piercing, sounds, he couldn't produce any other sounds. His tears and mucus filled his face, causing him to lack his ordinary quiet and proud aura. Instead, he seemed like a petty and low coward. It was truly pitiful. When Murong Fong saw him looking like this, he thought that he had finally scared him senseless with his torture and he became filled with pride. Taking a pill out, he stuffed it in Murong Liufeng's open mouth. Swallow this changing result pill. You won't be able to revolve your spiritual force in 7 days. Even if you're at the summit of Gold Core stage, it's useless. All you can do is lie down on Mr. Liao's body and tactfully cater to him. After 7 days, I'm afraid that Mr. Liao would have already used double cultivation method and dried you out completely. Gu Yulan and Murong Lu Feng, this is the result of you two sluts rebelling. Finished speaking, Murong Feng waved at something behind him and coldly said, "Get this cheap woman locked up for me again. As for this bast, properly tidy him up and nicely send him over to Mr. Liao for me." As he watched Gu Lu Feng being carried out, Murong Feng felt something unpleasant in his heart. Turning around, he walked over to the alchemy room. Over these past few days, he had been so busy, his feet barely touched the ground. The entire time, he had been busy with refining the cold food pill. He had long already come across cold food pill, he had even fed Gu Yulan it for 20 years. However, he had always only been able to get the finished product of cold food. He had never thought that his Murong family would be able to refine them. Nowadays, each influential family in Yanjing was becoming stronger and stronger, especially the newly risen Huangfu family. Huangfu even had a few experts at the summit of Gold Core stage. And their Murong family was becoming weaker and weaker as time went on. Gold Core stage martial artists were few and far in between. The medicinal hall marketplace had been completely dominated by Naylan family and Xingda Hall, and they were completely unable to get involved with the army. If it weren't for support from above, their Murong family would have long been kicked out of the 4 most influential families. Therefore, when Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory opened this time, they spent so much of Murong family's resources and human labor. They wished to obtain magic weapons and spiritual medicines in order to expand Murong Manor's strength. He didn't expect that even Murong family's strongest military strength ate a loss when entering inside. Now, he was the sole martial artist at Gold Core stage, and his cultivation stage had only been obtained through the use of pills. It was so bad that even the businesses under Murong family were becoming restless. And it was just in this time of danger that the Black Law Protector gave them the pill prescription to cold food. Murong Feng was originally a pre-master level refining pharmacist. When he had gotten his hands on the prescription for the cold food pill, he was simply overjoyed. As long as they got their hands on this prescription, they would be able to refine a steady supply of these pills. How could Murong family not become stronger then? Even Murong family didn't have any martial artists at gold core stage to oversee things. He was confident that having cold food pills in his hand would be able to have 10 or 100 gold core stage martial artists bowing to them. Now, after refining these cold food pills for a short month, Murong Feng was confident that he could already see the day when he would win success and recognition. That cold food pill had the ability to upgrade one's cultivation in a short period of time. But this cold food pill was also highly poisonous and able to silently attract people, causing them to become depraved. As long as someone took the cold food pill to a certain degree, they would become dependent and would find it hard to stand the withdrawal stage of the drug, regardless of their cultivation level. By that time, forget about even asking them to buy the pill using crystal stones. Even if Murong Feng asked them to kill people and commit arson, they wouldn't even hesitate to do it. Even now, you can see that all the people who have purchased the cold food pill haven't stopped buying them. In order for more people to become addicted to it, Murong Feng even sent some free cold food pills to outstanding youths from influential families and sects, earning their thanks and favor. Once the right time arrived, these people would become their puppets and involuntarily sacrifice themselves for Murong family. It was just that the materials needed to refine cold food pill were extremely rare and the process of refining the pills weren't easy either. Adding on to this is the fact that Murong Feng getting his hands on the pill prescription for cold food also came with a price. Murong family had to give the Black Law Protector an enormous amount of cold food pills each month. This allowed Murong Feng to pass these several days without pain and happiness. Apart from venting his feelings out on Gu Yulan and Murong Lufeng by torturing them, he spent the rest of his time in the refining room refining the cold food pills. Therefore, he was even ignorant of the situation regarding Murong Qianjian going to Xingde Hall and losing his life. Murong Feng just brought the materials into the refining room when he suddenly heard a miserable scream from outside the refining room. Immediately following this, a bloody light spilled onto the doors and window and the originally tightly closed doors were energetically pushed open. Murong Feng's face deepened and the pressure from his body immediately emerged. Wanton, who dares? He was in the middle of his sentence when he found that no more sounds were coming out of his mouth. His eyes went wide and his whole face was full of disbelief. It was as if his voice had been cut off and couldn't be used again. All Murong Feng saw was a youth carrying a sword slowly walking in through the door. The man's features were romantic, his peach blossom eyes felt as if they sucked in people's souls, yet they still kept a cold light in them. But a sinister-looking scar rested on this man's face, it horizontally ran from his forehead, passing by his nose, and to his cheeks. He held on to a long sword as he slowly walked inside. His clothes lifted up without wind and he held an unspeakable confidence that was clearly distinguished. He carried a feeling of frostiness and looked like a demon that had walked on red lotus petals to come here. At the first glance Murong Feng took at this man he cried out in fear, "How come you're here, Murong Lufeng?" Immediately after uttering his question, he suddenly realized. The Murong Lufeng in the prison just then was a fake. He didn't doubt or guess this, he was certain that this was true. When he saw the coldness that enveloped Gu Liufeng's person, he realized that the real Gu Lufeng wouldn't show frightened or pleading expressions, even if his whole body was filled with bruises. And he definitely wouldn't be scared, crying, and begging for forgiveness. You would be able to identify the true Gu Lufeng by just looking at his eyes. They were clear, fervent, and decisive. Naturally his eyes were very different from Murong family's, so much so that Murong Feng even loathed them. After thinking to thus far, Murong Feng suddenly became full of alarm. His eyes were wide with panic and with a trembling voice, he asked, "You? If you're here, then who is the Murong Lufeng in the prison?" Gu Lufeng arrogantly looked at Murong Feng and coldly laughed at him. "Murong Feng, you hid day after day in here, refining pills. Don't tell me that you didn't feel that you haven't seen your beloved son and wife for so many days." Murong Feng's temple palpitated and he recalled that Madame Murong's servant girl had told him several days before that both Madame Murong and Murong Linfeng were missing without a trace. At the time his hands were full with refining pills and didn't have time to pay attention to some missing person. All he thought was that the two of them had gone somewhere to relieve their boredom. Could it be that wasn't it? If it wasn't, where could they have gone? Gu Lufeng lowly began to laugh. His laugh was laced with evil intentions. What? You still haven't figured it out? Or could it be that you still don't want to believe things when they're right in front of you? To tie a man up with black iron chains, to scald and whip him day and night, and to lock a woman in a tiny suitcase and arbitrarily bully and humiliate her in that dusky dungeon. Murong Feng, you're very clear on those feelings, right? But unknowingly, that person you scalded and whipped was your beloved son. The woman that you locked in a tiny suitcase and tortured until she turned into an idiot is your first wife. Who knows what you must be feeling now? Ha ha ha, no. This isn't possible. This can't be possible. Murong Feng suddenly let out a hysterical shout and threw himself at Gu Lufeng. You vile son, it was you, this vile son, that caused me to bring harm to Lin Feng. You made me bring harm to Lin Feng's life. Just thinking about the fact that he had just sent his own beloved son to that perverted Mr. Liao to play with, caused Murong Feng to feel as if his whole world had been shaken. His heart felt as if it had just been torn to shreds. Gu Liufeng's eyes burst with burning flames, but when he spoke, his words were actually icy cold. Oh? So your son was actually tortured to death by you? Big congratulations to you. You thought that the person you were torturing was Murong Lufeng, so you didn't care about his life or death. You could stare on blankly as he fell into the pits of hell, suffered torture, and died? Murong Feng, you're truly a good father. Ah. Murong Feng hysterically said, you're a lowly type of person, you were born from a slut. I've never regarded you as my son, I only looked at you as another chess piece in my hands. If I want you alive, you'll live, if I want your death, you'll die. Just as he finished saying these words, he clapped his hands. Suddenly, a figure rushed out from a secret door located behind the pill stove and flashed over to Gu Lufeng. On the spot, Gu Lufeng rolled out of the way and was just about to retaliate. But when he saw the person in front of him, he involuntarily let out a cry of surprise. Jiu, one? The person that holding onto a knife and in the process of attacking him had lifeless eyes and a face full of unhealed scars. If it wasn't his Jiu, Guidao, then who was it? 1. Jiu, maternal uncle. However, Guidao seemed to have completely lose consciousness and looked as if he didn't even hear Gu Liufeng's voice. With the knife in his hand lifted and all the spiritual power he had in him channeled into it, he faced Gu Lufeng and ruthlessly hacked in his direction. In the moment of life and death, Heshi's figure appeared, like a demon, beside Gu Liufeng's body. In one swift motion, she dragged him behind her body. At the same time, the purple vine came out and blocked Guidao's blow. Heshi looked back to see Gu Liufeng's dazed expression and couldn't help but coldly remind him, what are you still dazed about, Gu Lufeng? Guidao is already being controlled by him. Do you want Murong Feng to have his way? When Gu Lufeng had been scolded by Heshi, he suddenly returned to his senses. Sure enough, he saw that Guidao's movements were sluggish and his eyes were vacant. Not only this, he also saw that he was clearly at gold core stage, yet he wasn't able to display that strength. It was clear that he had been controlled. Moreover, it wasn't just an ordinary control over a slave. Gu Lufeng tightened his fists. He didn't expect that the Jiu he had intentionally sent to the outskirts to recuperate would ultimately end up in Murong Feng's hands. No wonder he hadn't received any replies from Guidao after sending multiple letters after he had rescued his mother. When Murong Feng saw Gu Lufeng seething with anger, he couldn't help but laugh and sneer at him. Do you wish to know how I captured this man? When he heard that you were imprisoned by me, he foolishly ran over here to rescue you, all by himself. In the end, he just happened to have gotten into the Black Law Protector's hands. Ha ha ha. Death was near from him, yet this man was still yelling out your names, Gu Lufeng and his mother's. That type of manner is truly nauseating. But, that's all in the past. Nowadays he's my puppet. If I order him to kill people, he'll kill people. If I tell him to go die, he'll go die. When he finished speaking, the spiritual power in his body flowed out and he coldly ordered Guidao, go and kill those two for me. Don't be stingy with your life, fight as if your life depends on it. When Guidao heard Murongfeng's words, he looked like a puppet that had just been switched on. The knife in his hand raised and he ruthlessly chopped down at Gu Lufeng. Gu Lufeng raised his long sword several times to retaliate, but when he saw his Jiujiu's face, he couldn't help but lower his sword again and blindly evade his attacks. All the while he was shouting out, Jiujiu, I'm Lufeng ah. Quickly wake up. Ha ha ha, wake up. Don't dream. Murongfeng loudly laughed, who let him have such bad luck and made him bump into the Black Law Protector. Nowadays he's long since already lost his soul and become a mindless battle puppet. It's better if you wait until your next lifetime for him to wake up. Ha ha ha, Gu Lufeng looked at Murongfeng with scarlet red eyes and pounced on him, Murongfeng, you brute. I'm going to kill you. However, a knife quickly cut horizontally in front of him, blocking his road. Guidao was fighting like his life was on the line. Unless Gu Lufeng moved to kill him, he would be unable to forcefully make him withdraw. Gu Liufeng's heart was filled with discontentment and hatred, but he couldn't vent his feelings. It caused him to want to dismember Murongfeng into 1,000 pieces. Suddenly, he heard Heshi's clear and cold voice sound out from beside him, I'm stalling Guidao, you go capture Murongfeng. Regardless of what disease it is, capture the person and clearly look into it before making any other decision. If you act so impulsive and don't form a plan, aren't you just falling right into Murongfeng's calculations? Gu Lufeng heaved a sigh and the anger and franticness in his heart slowly washed away and he became serene. That's right, he had Shiyu by his side. As long as Shiyu's here, Jiujiu had a chance to be saved. Even if Jiujiu's soul was lost and he was unable to recover, he will certainly make Murongfeng, that brute, pay the price. But, if his mind has truly been taken by someone, I'm afraid that even if I can keep him alive, it'll be very hard for him to return to his original state. When Gu Lufeng heard Heshi's verdict, his whole face became lifeless and he started to shake. Then, he suddenly stood up and rushed over to Murongfeng. He firmly grabbed him by the collar and then sternly asked, Murongfeng, what exactly did you do to my Jiujiu? After being shaken, Murongfeng's vision blurred. Furthermore, the pain coming from the wound on his thigh caused him to grimace in pain. Gu Lufeng firmly punched him in the face and shouted out a warning, Murongfeng, if you don't speak, trust me, I'll kill you right now. Hi, Murongfeng fell into a fit of heavy coughing. He looked at Gu Lufeng with eyes brimming with hatred and resentment. You bast, don't tell me you wish to commit patricide. Patricide? Gu Lufeng acted as if he had heard the world's biggest joke. Blood rushed to his eyes and his face was full of taunting. Murongfeng, do you think you're worthy of being my father? Does a father watch as his own son is being abused and stand by like a bystander? Does a father watch as his own child is being assaulted and indifferently watch on? And what father would ignore his own child's face in front of his mother, even going as far as to blackmail him? And what father would whip his own child and press a flat iron on his own child countless times, all in the name of forcing secrets out of his child? 1. Natural silks, silk that comes from silkworms, silk created through natural processes. He let out a lung-splitting cough and still continued to rain down curses on Gu Lufeng, unfilial son. Bast. Hi, you're disgraceful, you don't deserve a good death. Hi, he still hadn't finished speaking when a purple vine came out from Heshi's hands and ran over to Murongfeng, ruthlessly whipping his face. Murongfeng let out a brief shriek and looked at Heshi with bitter eyes. He opened his mouth and started speaking, He didn't get to finish his words before the purple vine struck at his face again, followed by a loud, pa sound. Then, the sound of vomiting came after as Murong Feng spit out blood and several shattered teeth. If you looked at him right now, you would see his face full of alarm. He lightly laughed and warned, if you curse myself or Gu Lufeng again, I won't mind completely knocking all your teeth out. Murong Feng's entire body shook and he felt a scorching hot pain emerge on his face. After a long time passed, he rushed to He and angrily yelled, I'm warning you guys, If you guys kill me, you'll regret it later on. If you guys killed me, you wouldn't be able to run away. He's face filled with contempt and she sneered at him, cutting him off, will regret it? Based on your Murong manner, that can't even be seen publicly. Oh. Or is it based on Murong Hai and Murong Zhangfeng who have both turned into watery blood in sealed dragon domain's secret territory? At first, Murong Feng turned completely blank. Then, his face greatly changed. Despite the fact that he was bound together, he still threw himself at He. You know how they both died? Was it you that killed them? Slut, exactly what kind of person are you? When Murong Feng uttered these words, the purple vine suddenly perked up and firmly landed a slap on Murong Feng's face. This time, Murong Feng's nose was fractured, causing him to start screaming in pain. He coldly said, right now, it's I who's interrogating you. You say that we won't be able to run. Who's the person behind Murong family? Is it the person who wears that gray cloak? At first, Murong Feng was still letting out miserable screams, but when he heard the last part of He's question, he became startled. How could you know? You've seen him. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and his face greatly changed. That night, the Black Law Protector's feeling of someone spying in the manor, that was you, wasn't it? Exactly what type of person are you? You're clearly at Foundation establishment stage, yet you're able to evade the Black Law Protector's probing. The Black Law Protector is an expert at nascent soul stage, nobody can evade him, Black Law Protector? He knit her brow, he's the same person who also holds Jia Dao's soul. That's right. Murong Feng clenched his teeth before saying, the Black Law Protector has a refining soul banner on him, it's an extremely difficult to deal with magic weapon. That Gui Dao overestimated himself and ran over here to rescue Murong Lin Feng, that animal. Consequently, he had been sacrificed by the Black Law Protector to his banner and had his soul refined. Since his soul has been completely taken away, Gui Dao can be considered immortal. Then why is he a puppet now? Murong Feng's face held hesitation, he didn't wish to reveal this. But he saw the purple vine, in He's hand, perking up and became scared again. He could feel an unbearable pain bursting from his face and was scared out of his wits, so he promptly answered, I'll speak. I'll speak. The Black Law Protector has a Mr. Liao by his side who's an expert at the technique of refining puppets. He frequently snatches good-looking boys and girls, after picking and mending them, their souls would go to the Black Law Protector's refining soul banner. All that they would be left with would be one soul in their body. A body with only one soul won't die, but it would lose wisdom and become muddle-headed. Mr. Liao uses this special method to refine people into puppets and leave them by their side. Gui Dao is a battle puppet that I paid a high cost for Mr. Liao to personally come help me turn him into one. All the people that were refined into puppets are unable to return to their normal state. Even if the puppet restriction was removed, they would just become muddle-headed, like an idiot, for their entire lifetime. I'll kill you. Murong Feng's words made Gu Lufeng turn berserk. His entire person was practically about to pounce on Murong Feng and ruthlessly tear this sickening, callous, and selfish man apart. He grabbed Gu Lufeng to stop him and lowered her head to look at Murong Feng. What's the origin of the Black Law Protector? Where does the cold food flower come from? When He initially entered this room, she spotted beautiful and tender cold food flowers being raised. Cold food flowers looked extremely similar to poppies, but these poppies had a much larger build than the ones in Heshi's past life. Not only that, the flower's fragrance was strong and the flower itself held a darkness around it. It was clearly a spirit plant connected to darkness. First, Heshi used a hoarding pouch to collect the flower, before she stored it away in her space. When she finished, she came over just in time to see Gui Dao holding knife as he was just about to strike at Gu Lufeng. She was very curious about this cold food flower. It was a plant connected to such a large amount of darkness, so Heshi could easily guess that such a plant would be impossible to find on Miluo continent nowadays, let alone nurturing it until it bloomed. At the time it was believed that people had 7 souls. People with the correct amount of souls were normal, any less would mean that the person wasn't. When Murong Feng heard Heshi's question, his entire body began to shake and he violently shook his head. I don't know. I don't know. I only know that the Black Law Protector sent these cold food flowers and the prescription to the pills so that I could refine cold food pills. I truly don't know anything else. It wasn't that he didn't want to say it, it was that he couldn't. Murong Feng was clearer than anyone else on the Black Law Protector's vicious and merciless ways. If he leaked information that shouldn't be leaked, then Murong Feng didn't even dare to imagine the downfall of Murong family. When Heshi heard Murong Feng's denial, her lips picked up in a radiant curve and she asked, her voice clear and pleasant, "Oh? So you don't know anything, ah? Since you don't know, then what's the point of leaving you alive?" Once she said this, the purple vine cheerily turned around, generating flapping sounds, and flew over to Murong Feng. It quickly wrapped around Murong Feng's head and neck and proceeded to relentlessly pull Murong Feng's lips apart. At an unknown time, a singular black pill had already appeared in Heshi's slender, white fingertips. She quickly shot the pill and it accurately fell into Murong Feng's mouth. With all his strength, Murong Feng attempted to struggle against the two, but his hands were already wrapped in the natural silks. How could he fight against the purple abyss vine? All he felt was a pill dissolving down his throat and the following bitter aftertaste that ensued alongside the smell of medicine. After he fully swallowed the pill, the purple abyss vine released him. Murong Feng's entire face was painted with anger and alarm and his eyes were wide open, glaring straight at Heshi. He opened his mouth and was just about to begin cursing at her. Then, a piercing pain erupted from all the bones in his body. Alongside the pain, he heard the frightening sounds of G-E-G-G-E-G, creaking sound, in his ear. It felt as if there were countless insects digging into his bones and simultaneously gnawing at them. Ah, ah, ah. Murong Feng's face twisted from the pain and he was screaming and rolling about on the floor. The feeling of his bones being slowly gnawed on and his flesh being mixed into the broken bone fragments was too horrible and too painful. However, the strangest part was although that he was clearly experiencing an immense amount of pain, from an outsider's perspective, he didn't have any marks on his body, whatsoever. He incessantly beat his own joints and bones, but apart from fracturing them, there was no other way to cease the pain. Spare my life. Spare my life. I'll speak. Woo woo woo. I'll speak. Murong Feng crawled over to the side of Heshi's leg and begged her in the midst of the waves of pain. At this moment, the terror he held for Heshi far outweighed the terror he felt for the Black Law Protector. Currently, Murong Feng's entire face was already full of mucus and tears, his hands and feet were fractured, and his face held a prominent scar left by the purple abyss vine from earlier. His entire person looked like a sorry figure, his current appearance was far from the one of Murong family's clan head. His heart was brimming with bitter resentment and dread. He vented some of these feelings by fiercely glaring at Gu Lufeng. It was all this unfilial son's fault. If this unfilial son didn't collude with outsiders and scheme against Murong family, his Murong family would have never fallen into such a plight. But once Murong Feng's eyes met with Heshi's smiling ones, his body immediately started trembling again and he didn't dare to hide anything anymore. As it turns out, Murong Manor suddenly lost several elders who were at high-level gold core stage, some 20 years back, and suffered a drastic decline. Many of the owners of businesses Murong family owned began to turn restless. They wanted to replace Murong family. During Murong family's desperate time, a person proclaiming themselves as the Black Law Protector suddenly appeared, and he sought out the clan head of Murong family at the time. Their agreement would be able to help Murong family suppress the powers under their family, allowing them to steadily stay in their position as one of the four most influential families. The catch was that Murong family had to be their eyes and ears and wholeheartedly swear their loyalty to them. Nobody in Murong family knew exactly what type of person the Black Law Protector was. All they knew was that his cultivation was extremely high. 20 years before, his cultivation was already at nascent soul stage. By his side he had a 4th-rank doctor and a Mr. Liao who was an expert in refining puppets. With the Black Law Protector's help, their Murong family was quickly able to establish themselves in Jinling City. And secretly, they began to help the Black Law Protector in all kinds of shady businesses. Every day, their Murong family had to hang up a sign saying that they were recruiting little man servants. They would fetch children from remote mountain areas or from the streets. From these children, they would filter out the ones with spiritual roots and use them as culture fluid for the cold food flowers. He knit her brow and said, "You guys have kidnapped so many children for so long, have you guys seriously not had any parents who came to complain about their children missing?" In response, Murong Feng's head drooped and he quietly said, "Naturally that's happened. If any parents discover any clues, we usually kill their entire family, or perhaps even the entire village. Then we shift the blame onto loose martial artists or bandits. Are you guys even human anymore? Do you have any humanity?" He didn't even respond before Gu Lufeng couldn't take it anymore. He walked over to Murong Feng and firmly kicked him. "Could it be that you guys are the only people on this world and other children and people are nothing more than brutes? Even if they are brutes, that's still a life. Why are you allowed to willfully trample and slaughter them? Murong Feng, are you not scared of meeting retribution? Of not reincarnating after death? Of forever walking the path of a brute?" Murong Feng was only afraid of He held much hatred toward Gu Lufeng. So once he heard Gu Liufeng's questions, he immediately answered back with confidence, "All of our actions are for the sake of reviving Murong family. The death of hundreds of those lowly people is the same as the death of hundreds of ants. What worth do they have to be able to receive our guilt and pity? Actually, you're the evil creature here. You clearly possess Murong family's blood, yet you colluded with outsiders and trapped Murong family. You're the one who really deserves to die 1,000 deaths. You brute, you're the one who'll receive retribution." The long sword in Gu Liufeng's hand suddenly transformed in his hand. Step by step, he walked over to Murong Feng. Murong Feng saw that his eyes were even more red than before. It looked like blood was practically about to drip down. And each step Gu Lufeng took, the killing intent on his body became even thicker. This caused his heart to burst with intense fear. He began to wiggle and recoiled backward. I'm your father. If you kill me, you'll face heaven's wrath. You'll meet countless demons on that day. You'll also fall down." He walked forward a step and held on to Gu Lufeng. She faintly told him, "There's no need to face demons just for a person like this. Let me do it, okay?" "No." Gu Lufeng whirled around to face He. His eyes were burning and there was 20 years' worth of built-up pain and hatred in his face. But more than that, there was determination. You've already done enough for me. I want to personally end this person's life." A sneer appeared on his face. "Do you know how much I abhor my name Murong Lufeng? How much disgust I hold for Murong Feng? But unfortunately, his blood flows through my veins. This is a sin I can't avoid. Since it's my crime, let me personally end everything." Let me personally end the cycle of nightmares that have plagued me for the past 20 years. Even if I have to face demons due to this one incident, I won't hesitate. Right after saying this, Gu Liufeng's long sword glinted in the light as it rose up. Then, it chopped down at Murong Feng. Murong Feng's face was filled with fear and despair. He opened his mouth and seemed to have become hysterical. You'll regret killing me. You'll soon join me, nobody can escape. Ha 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 ha, Murong Feng's face felt as if it had a line drawn between the middle of his eyebrows down to his nose. Moments later, Gu Liufeng's long sword came crashing down right at this mark, perfectly splitting his face in half. Boiling blood came sprouting out, splashing right onto Gu Liufeng. It was obvious that he could have dodged all of the blood splashing on him, but he stood completely still, completely expressionless, allowing it to be sprayed onto him. The only thing that changed in him was that the decisiveness in his eyes became more and more apparent as the seconds ticked on. From now on, Murong Lufeng and Murong Manor ceased to exist in this world. There was only the Gu Lufeng who admired and vowed loyalty to Shiyu. Gu Lufeng abruptly turned around and knelt down on one knee in front of Heshi. His sword was propped on the floor and his back was curved. On his face there was sincerity, serenity, and not a trace of humiliation, as he thanks to Master for allowing me to take revenge on my greatest enemy. It's just that this subordinate taking his own initiative may have caused heaven to bring her wrath on the day that this subordinate advances in rank to nascent soul stage. At that time, it's quite possible that this subordinate won't be able to advance in rank and will therefore be unable to stay by Master's side. Heshi rubbed the goosebumps on her arm away and quickly interrupted Gu Lufeng. What nonsense has gotten into you, Gu Lufeng? Have your brains gone rotten after Murong Feng's blood splashed onto you? Can you speak properly? Unhappy, Heshi rolled her eyes. Following this, her face became dignified. I've always thought that the words Murong Feng spoke before death's door has some deep meanings. Moreover, I feel a bad premonition. Let's quickly leave. Oh, depart from here. Where do you guys want to go? A deep and muffled voice sounded out from the doorway, lacking any prior foreshadowing of its entrance. Gu Lufeng and Heshi's faces both changed and showed displeasure. Without a second thought, both of their figures soared up. The sound of a crash ensued and a large hole appeared on the ceiling of the refining room. Both Heshi and Gu Liufeng's figures jumped onto the roof. However, the newly arrived person's speed was much faster than theirs. In a split second, a gloomy and cold breath enveloped the both of them. The gloomy and cold breath carried a bloody stench and a pressure that suffocated people alongside it. When they lifted their heads to look up, they saw a dark red cloth covering over the sky. And that bloody stench and suffocating pressure was emitting from the middle of this cloth. They could both see that this cloth was just about to drop down and wrap them up. Heshi and Gu Liufeng's faces both immediately became unsightly. Heshi had already begun to bleed from her mouth. This was because her cultivation level was still low. She didn't have the skill to contend against martial artists at nascent soul stage quite yet. Suddenly, the sound of something tearing could be heard. Looking up revealed that the dark red cloth had been cut into 7 or 8 pieces by a long sword. Cut into tatters, each of the pieces were taken away by the wind, blown away to another place. Heshi looked at Wu Exayan, who was standing in front of both her and Gu Lufeng, and let loose a breath. Then immediately after, her hand flew to her stomach and she vomited a mouthful of blood. Shiyu, are you okay? Gu Lufeng worriedly supported her. Heshi shook her head, nothing's wrong. Wu Exayan, be careful, this person's cultivation level is higher than yours. Standing in front of Heshi and Gu Lufeng was Wu Exayan, who nodded his head at Heshi's previous words. His expression was grave and his eyes held an icy and bloodthirsty glint on them as his gaze landed on the distant male. The male wore clothes made out of ashy, coarse cloth. His body was covered by a black cloak, which had a high collar that covered his face. The only thing exposed were a pair of falcon-like eyes that peered at them from the darkness. It seems like this is the Black Law Protector Murong Feng was mentioning. The cloaked man was currently standing opposite to Heshi, Gu Lu Feng, and Wu Xian. His appearance seemed relaxed and his eyes were brimming full of arrogance as he looked over at them. His eyes slowly shifted over to Wu Xian's body and he softly laughed. You actually have a nascent soul stage expert, no wonder Murong Feng fell. With great difficulty I nurtured that dog for over 10 years, but he was disposed of so quickly, it's such a pity. What price are you guys planning to pay for making me lose such a handy dog? Heshi narrowed her eyes and sneered at him. I imagine your heart would feel more pain over losing those cold food flowers rather than that handy dog, right? You touched the cold food flowers. When the cloaked man heard what she said, he suddenly became angry. He used his divine knowledge to sweep over the room and found no shadow of the cold food flowers. The gaze he looked at Heshi with was as sharp as a sword. It was no longer like the insipid cloud and soft wind one from before. What about the cold food flowers? Naturally they're destroyed. Heshi coldly laughed. Those spiritual plants have the darkness attribute, they have the ability to endanger the world. Are they just supposed to be left to be eaten? I'm sorry, I'm not as abnormal and inhumane as you guys are. You, courting death. The cloaked man let out a strict shout and his figure suddenly flashed from where he was standing and began charging at Heshi. Heshi could already see that this move was far different from the one he used with the red cloth, which was played down. Instead, this one carried anger and a desire to dismember her into 1,000 pieces. Wu Xian's entire body turned into a glowing white light as he soared over to meet the cloaked man head-on. Nascent soul stage level fighting was something that Heshi wasn't capable of participating in yet. Even Gu Lu Feng, who was at the summit of Gold Core stage, could only stand by the side and watch on. Even though Gold Core and Nascent Soul were merely a step away from each other, the step was still the distance between heaven and earth. Once someone entered Nascent Soul, they would be considered one of the top strengths in Miluo continent, a supermaster. However, even if Heshi couldn't participate in the fight, it didn't mean she couldn't clearly see the circumstances of the fight. Although Wu Xian's upgrade to Nascent Soul stage had already become stable, this cloaked man had clearly been at Nascent Soul stage for countless years. He was far away from a match Wu Xian could take on. Heshi's brows wrinkled, her brows then seemed to have thought of something. From her space, she took out a golden, long sword and threw it over at Wu Xian, instructing, "This is a replica of Killing Sky Sword, it's suitable to all martial artists with thunder and fire attributes." After she threw the long sword over to Wu Xian, a sudden boom sounded out and Wu Xian flipped over in the air. As he grasped the long sword in his hand, he felt the spiritual power in his body surging and let out a surprised expression. The Killing Sky Sword was a unique, legendary spirit weapon, its craftsmanship was only secondary to the sealed dragon sword. The replica of the Killing Sky Sword couldn't recreate the same power as the original sword, but compared to ordinary flying swords, its power already far surpassed them. As expected, after Wu Xian began using the Killing Sky Sword, his strength suddenly rose. For a moment, Wu Xian and the cloaked man were evenly matched. And the cloaked man's face changed colors when he saw this new advancement. Whilst he was fighting with Wu Xian, he also began to yell at Heshi, "Youngster, what kind of person are you? The Killing Sky Sword has long been lost, even the replica of it hasn't been seen in the world for 100 years. How come you have it in your hands?" Chapter 487 Refining Soul Banner. Heshi faintly smiled and said, "I feel like the origins of the cold food flower are even fishier than the Killing Sky Sword, right? This spiritual plant shouldn't even be able to grow in Miluo continent. If you told me how you guys got cold food flowers, then I'll tell you the history of the Killing Sky Sword, okay?" A scowl formed on the cloaked man's face and his mind scattered. In this moment of carelessness, Wu Xian was able to cut through his clothes. The cloaked man retreated several steps back and sneered at Wu Xian, "Yay, I'm bored of playing with you. Do you really think you're my opponent?" Wu Xian slowly turned over the qi and blood in his body, mixing them together. His expression remained detached and he didn't bother to pay attention to the man's words. The cloaked man looked at Wu Xian and then looked over at He, who stood behind him, and a bloodthirstiness rose up in his eyes. Since you guys wish to court death, I'll help you guys. In any case, I'm bored of playing. Right after saying this, a small, black banner appeared in the cloaked man's chicken claw-like hands. He began to mutter incantations under his breath. As he was muttering them, the black banner grew larger and larger, until it grew even taller than himself. The cloaked man mischievously let out 2 laughs and touched the banner's icy flagpole. He faintly remarked, "Go ahead, my darling. Lately you haven't had any chance to show off, you must be starved. But this one time should compensate you. You haven't gotten the chance to taste nascent soul stages yet. They taste much more delicious than 100 gold core stages." After saying this, the cloaked man's hand raised and a flash of spiritual energy entered the banner. In a moment, the banner began to shake, and following this, a round black shadow shot out from the banner and flew up into the sky. That black shadow condensed and became thicker, forming into a black devilish face with tusks. Once it was done forming, it faced Wu Xian and rushed at him. In the blink of an eye, the black shadow surrounded Wu Xian. The devilish face opened up a bloody mouth and unceasingly started biting at Wu Xian's body. Every bite the face took, the face grew larger and Wu Xian's breath became weaker. Although the killing sky sword was still in Wu Xian's hand and he was constantly waving it around, it began to wave around slower and slower as the seconds ticked by. Gu Lufeng clenched his teeth and said, "That should be the refining soul banner." The soul refining banner was a sinister magic weapon that grew stronger whenever it engulfed martial artists' souls and essence. The cloaked man began to laugh out loud. "Rest assured, when that youngster has been engulfed, the next ones are you too." After saying this, his figure flashed and his chicken claw-like hands changed into demonic claws. Then he faced He and threw himself at her whilst clawing at her. Bang! A loud sound rang out and the black air suddenly scattered. Even the devilish face turned over and fell 10 feet away. It fell down on the ground and twitched with a majority the shadow surrounding it even fading out. He then felt a large force pulling herself and Gu Lufeng back a few steps. It felt as if she was able to escape the cloaked man's clutches. Wu Xian stood in front of He and Gu Lufeng. The muscles and bones in his hands and arms were entirely broken and his whole body was filled with bruises. It looked as if he was going to collapse at any moment. "Wang! Shui Gongzi, quickly run!" Wu Xian hoarsely shouted. "At most, I can only hold him back for a quarter of an hour." He stared blankly at Wu Xian. It was as if blood had filled her sight, everything turned red and a burst of burning rage filled her. She hated feeling weak and she hated allowing the people by her side receive injuries even more. When the cloaked man saw the devilish face's weak state, he was suddenly furious. He had used countless spirits to fully raise and condense this devilish face, its face could even rival initial stage of nascent soul stage. But unexpectedly that repulsive youngster actually dared to risk losing his arm by exploding his spiritual power which, in turn, caused his devilish face to gain a serious injury. And now, even if it swallowed these 3 youngsters' souls, it would still need to recover for a period before it could return back to its previous state. 1. Yay! Paternal grandfather or old man, in this case, he's calling Wu Xian an old man. Thinking up to here, the cloaked man clenched his teeth then bit down on his tongue, intentionally injuring it in the process. With a mouthful of his own blood essence, he spit it out onto the refining soul banner. "Want to leave? Don't dream. Today, none of you should think of leaving." Once his words went out, the originally weakened and unable to move devilish face suddenly became enveloped in a red light and a malicious howling and crying face resounded around everyone. The devilish face moved and suddenly soared into the air. Before long it was already rushing over to Wu Xian, ready to begin a second round of attacks. The cloaked man let out a chuckle then sneered, I want to see what method you use to defend yourself this time. Wu Xian was unable to lift one of his arms, his spiritual power was practically drained, and his entire body was littered with injuries. When He saw that the devilish face was about to eat Wu Xian's head in one go, she suddenly summoned a golden ball of flames in her hands and flew over to the devilish face. When the cloaked man saw her actions, he began to laugh out loud. Ignorant child, the black devil's face has a spirit body, how could an insignificant fire harm it? But the smile on his face was quickly wiped away. Because once the golden flame made contact with the devilish face, the sound of burning sounded out and the devilish face twisted. It let out a pained expression before trying its best to run away. The cloaked man paled in fear. Spiritual fire. How can this be? You're only at foundation establishment stage. Even if you were able to practice and conjure up heavenly fire, you would still be unable to hurt the devilish face to this degree. You. Just what type of person are you? The black devilish face was a spirit, it feared all spiritual power attacks, but at the same time, it dirted spiritual power. Adding on to that was his blood essence, which supported the devilish face even further. Even if spiritual fire attacked the devilish face, it was reasonable to assume that his blood essence could dissolve it. But how could the cloaked man have expected the spiritual fire He released to have such high spiritual power and essence purity? His shock didn't last long though. Soon after, the cloaked man burst out into laughter again. Regardless of where your spiritual fire came from, for you to be able to release spiritual fire with such pure essence must mean that your soul is much more solid than that of an ordinary person. As long as my refining soul banner is able to swallow you and that youngster at nascent soul stage, its strength will definitely increase by tenfold. Ha ha ha. Coming here this time can't be considered a loss. Right after saying this, a black thread flew out from the cloaked man's hands. Before He would react, it had already restricted all of her actions. Zze, you're now my most precious treasure and the best food for my devilish face. If I were to let you die, where would I find someone with as solid a soul as yourself? Obediently wait here for me, wait for my devilish face to swallow that youngster with nascent soul stage. Then, I'll properly receive you. Ha ha ha. After saying so, the cloaked man's figure flashed and he directly threw himself at Wu Xian. The current Wu Xian was completely spent, he was even unable to use the killing sky sword. Killing him would be a simple feat however. Just as the cloaked man flew up, a strong wind suddenly hit him. Peng was the only sound that was heard and the cloaked man felt as if he had been hit by an iron board. His entire person fell down and he let out a groan when he hit the floor. Aiya, my bottle gourd, my fine wine, it all spilled. The entire thing spilled, outrageous youngster, actually daring to spill my fine wine. Quickly compensate me. He suddenly blanked, she knew this voice and its all too familiar intonation. Sure enough, the wrinkled face of an old man appeared in front of her face, growing larger and larger as the pungent smell of wine hit her in the face. When the old fellow seemed to have clearly seen her, he suddenly let out a laugh. Aiya, my obedient disciple, how could you be here? Ah. How coincidental, too coincidental. Seeing as you can't move, has someone bullied you? You tell me and I'll go hit him for you. 1. Bottle gourd, a type of vine that's grown for its fruit. When harvested young, it can be eaten as a vegetable and when harvested mature, it can be used as a utensil once dried. After speaking up to here, the old fellow suddenly shook his bottle gourd around and mischievously laughed. However, since your master's wine is gone, shouldn't you, as a disciple, express? Hey, mischievous laughter. For a moment, He was unable to respond, the sudden turnaround was too theatrical. She lowly coughed, untie me first. Okay. Then you have to give me wine, clever disciple. The old man's black hands raised and were just about to move to untie her when he abruptly paused and said, Wrong clever disciple, you still haven't called me master. If you don't call me master, how can I untie you? I'm only saving my clever disciple. Heshi's mouth twitched and she fiercely stared at him. You're threatening me. Hey, how can that be considered a threat? In the mountain, didn't you agree to pay respects to this old man as your master? When did I agree? The old man's face looked like that of a rascal as he winked and pointed at Wu Xian, beginning to make a fuss. Yeah, this fellow's injuries aren't shallow. If you don't quickly provide critical care, his cultivation will drop from nascent soul stage. Zhe, how pitiful, how unfortunate there's nobody to save him. Heshi looked over at the bloody and barely breathing Wu Xian and clenched her teeth, spitting out 2 words, Master. 1. Yeah, clever disciple. The old man's eyebrows raised in joy when he heard those 2 words, 1, come from Heshi's mouth. He waved his hand and the black rope tied around Heshi's body also fell down. Heshi didn't bother to talk to him and quickly walked over to Wu Xian's side. The first thing she did was to give him a pill to swallow. At this point, Wu Xian's mind was already hazy. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he murmured, fortunately Wang Fei is fine, otherwise. Master will definitely be worried of your death, fool. Heshi picked up a silver needle and efficiently stuck it into his body so his injury could be prevented from worsening. Then, she hoarsely said, Idiot. Whose life could be more important than your own? You're about to die and yet you're still afraid that Nangong Yu will be worried. At this moment, the cloaked man that had been knocked away by the bottle gourd had finally stood back up from the roof. He felt dizzy from being knocked, but his body didn't have any injuries. When he saw Heshi, who had been untied, and that crazy old man, he suddenly angrily shouted, which smelly old man actually dares to spoil my affairs? Are you tired of living? The old man clicked his tongue and shook his head in response, you're a part of the younger generation, how come you lack manners? Don't you understand to respect the old and cherish the young? It was clearly you who had knocked over my wine, isn't it the right thing to pay me back? Zhe, you even dare to plot against my beautiful, clever disciple. Look at you wearing a cloak in the evening, how shameful. I see that you must be jealous of my disciple's good looks. This annoying troublemaker directly angered the cloaked man enough for him to want to spit out a mouthful of blood. Heshi's mouth twitched before she interrupted the old man's words, Master, compared to this fellow, which one of you is stronger? Since she had already agreed that this old man was his master, Heshi wouldn't be unreasonable anymore. The old man rubbed his bottle gourd and mischievously laughed, well, that's hard to say. If I drank some wine, this old man would be able to beat 3 cows. If I haven't drank wine, master knock him down and I guarantee that, in the future, you'll have so much wine that you wouldn't be able to drink it all. Really? Clever disciple, you better not cheat me. Heshi's hands hugged her chest as she smiled at him. If I'm cheating you then you can expel me. Ayaya, how could that be done? You're the clever disciple that I worked so hard to get. 1. Master. In Chinese, master is comprised of 2 characters, Shifu. Whilst Heshi and her master were speaking, neither of them tried to conceal their words. This directly caused the cloaked man to become angry again. You dare underestimate me, directly go and die for me. Right after saying this, bursts of bone-chilling cold wind started up and faced Heshi and everyone else. In response, the old man threw the empty bottle gourd away and his figure disappeared from his original spot. Heshi hadn't even reacted to what he had just done when she suddenly heard pang. Soon after, the bitter cold wind dissipated and even the black fog disappeared, leaving nothing else in front of them. That's right, precisely. Nothing was left. The cloaked man's presence had completely disappeared. The old man rubbed his black palm and guiltily looked toward Heshi. With forced laughter he said, Ayaya, it seems like I didn't control my strength and miscalculated. Heshi frowned, miscalculated? By how far? Hiccup. That, the old man looked at the sky, just then I wasn't looking at the direction and didn't see where he flew off to, ha ha ha. So clever disciple, even though I didn't knock him flat. Your master can be considered to have exerted energy, right? Moreover, by the time he falls back onto the ground, he'll definitely fall flat. He wouldn't even be able to crawl back up after 6 hours. About that wine, Heshi narrowed her eyes and silently watched the old man for a long time. She was certain that this old man had deliberately not laid a heavy hand on the cloaked man. She stared at the old man until he nervously scratched his head. Then she loosened her expression and lightly laughed. Rest assured, there will be plenty of wine. In any event, thanks to Master for saving us. Clever disciple, you're too considerate and too filial. Your master loves you the most, smelly old man, your entire body is full of louse and wine, quickly get away from me. Clever disciple, don't be like this. Master likes to hug you, how can you decline? Do you believe that I won't pour all the wine out in front of your face? Clever disciple, clever disciple. I know my wrongs. You must give fine wine as presents, to one's elders/superiors as a sign of respect, to Master Ah. The fight between Heshi's group and the cloaked man started quickly and also ended quite quickly. However, it still roused up quite a lot of movement. Just speaking of Murong family, a few of their houses collapsed. The children in Murong family had been scared by the shaking and were reduced to shivering in their rooms, none of them dared to step foot outside. When Jin Ling's imperial guards arrived at the scene and saw the terrifying fighting going on, they were filled with fear. How would they dare to continue investigating? So, naturally, this matter remained unsettled. However, who could have thought that Murong Manor would have disappeared just 3 days after the fight occurred at Murong Manor that night? In the span of a night all of Murong Manor's guards, manservants, servant girls, and children had disappeared without a trace. Even their bones couldn't be found. What was the scariest part of the whole ordeal was that the houses inside Murong Manor all looked as if they had been burned by a fire. Apart from ashes and fallen walls, there was nothing else. Murong family was one of the 4 most influential families in Yanjing City. Yet in a breath's time all of its people had disappeared without even the smallest bit of a trace left behind. This matter left the people of Yanjing City alarmed and restless for a few days. The most worried were the remaining 3 most influential families. Although they were busy with receiving the power of Murong family, they were still wary and fearful. The enemy was just too powerful. They actually dared to thoroughly eliminate Murong family right in front of the Imperial Guards. Would there be a day when it was their own turn? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.